There is a continent at the bottom of the world that holds secrets older than any civilization written into your history books. Older than Rome, older than Greece, older than the walls of Babylon and the tombs of Egypt. A continent where red deserts stretch so far in every direction that the horizon seems to curve downward under its own weight, where the night sky is so dark and so dense with stars that ancient people looked up and saw not emptiness but a living map, a pulsing network of stories written in light. This is Australia. And somewhere beneath its dust, rising from its plains, carved into its sandstone cliffs and pressed into its dark volcanic hillsides, there are structures that were old before the first pharaoh ever pressed his sandaled foot into the mud of the Nile Delta. 7 of them, in particular, have started to surface in the quiet edges of archaeological conversation, in the footnotes of papers that few people read, in the whispered conclusions of researchers who visit remote sites and come back changed by what they find. 7 places where stone was arranged with intention, where earth was shaped by hands that understood geometry, astronomy, and the long patience required to build something meant to last not a generation, not a dynasty, but an age. If you're watching this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know where you are right now and what time it is. Someone is watching this from a quiet room in Melbourne as a thunderstorm moves across the bay. Someone is in a farmhouse in Queensland with the windows open and the crickets going. Someone is in London or Toronto or Osaka, nowhere near Australia at all, and yet somehow drifting into the deep past of a place they've never been. That quiet connection across time zones and distance is something I think about every time I make one of these. We're all sharing the same dark. We're all listening to the same ancient story. So let the lights go down, or let them already be down. Let your body settle into whatever surface is holding you right now, and let's begin. Not with the megaliths themselves, not yet, but with something older even than stone. With the people who were here first. The Aboriginal Australians are the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. That is not a metaphor or an approximation. It is what the genetic evidence says, clearly and without ambiguity. Modern humans arrived in Australia somewhere between 65,000 and 80,000 years ago, possibly earlier. They crossed water to do it, which means they had boats or rafts, which means they had engineering, planning, and cooperative social organization capable of organizing a sea voyage into territory no human had ever seen. They landed on shores that are now underwater because sea levels during the last ice age were dramatically lower than they are today. The coastlines they first touched are gone, swallowed by the ocean thousands of years before the first Egyptian pharaoh built the first mastaba tomb. What this means is that any structure, any arrangement of stone, any engineered feature of the Australian landscape that those first people built or modified could be extraordinarily old, not hundreds of years old, not a few thousand. We are talking about a potential age range that stretches back before any other civilization on Earth had produced a single written word, a single fired brick, a single arranged stone. And here is where it gets complicated and interesting and strange, because archaeology in Australia has historically undercounted, undervalued, and underinvestigated what the Aboriginal peoples built. For much of the colonial period, there was an active ideological assumption that the continent's first inhabitants were nomadic in the simplest sense. People who moved through the landscape without modifying it, without architecture, without the kind of large-scale land management that leaves physical evidence. That assumption was wrong. It has been demonstrated to be wrong by decades of careful research, by Aboriginal elders who never stopped saying it was wrong, and by the ground itself, which keeps turning up evidence that contradicts the simplest story. Australia's Aboriginal peoples were engineers. They were astronomers. They were architects of landscape on a scale that rivals anything in the ancient world. They built fish traps that have been carbon dated to more than 8,000 years old, predating the construction of Stonehenge by 4,000 years. They managed fire across continental scales. They built stone houses, stone arrangements, stone circles, and stone alignments at sites across the continent, from the volcanic plains of southwestern Victoria to the red gorges of the Northern Territory to the sandstone plateaus of Queensland. 7 of those sites have become the focus of this story tonight. And the first one will ask you to imagine a valley in the highlands of Victoria on a cold winter morning 6,500 years ago, where the sky was still dark and someone was watching for the first light. The site is called Wurdi Yawang. It sits in the Yuyangs Regional Park, about 50 kilometers southwest of Melbourne, on a low rise overlooking a broad, flat plain. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a scattered arrangement of basalt rocks, dark and weathered, pressed into the pale grass. You could walk past it and see only rocks. You could tell yourself it was geological, random, the result of ancient volcanic activity leaving fragments across the hillside. But then you start to measure. Wurdi Yawang is an egg-shaped stone arrangement. It stretches roughly 50 meters across at its widest point. The stones are basalt, dark and heavy, shaped by volcanic forces that created the surrounding landscape. The arrangement includes somewhere between 90 and 100 individual stones, and they are not random. They form a coherent geometric shape with a defined western apex. And at that western apex, 3 prominent stones, taller than the others, have been placed in a precise alignment. Those 3 stones point directly at the setting sun on the summer solstice. The researchers who first formally documented this were Dwayne Hamaker from Monash University and his colleagues, working with the Wathaurong Aboriginal people, the traditional custodians of the land where Wurdi Yawang stands. When the measurements were taken and checked and taken again, the conclusion was unavoidable. This is an astronomical observatory. Someone built it to track the movement of the sun across the year. The summer solstice sunset, the winter solstice sunset, and the equinox positions can all be observed from specific stones within the arrangement. Astronomy in stone, in Australia, potentially thousands of years before anything similar appears in the European record. The estimated age of Wurdi Yawang is not precisely known because dating stone arrangements is difficult. The Aboriginal elders of the Wathaurong people say it is very old. The geological assessment of the site suggests it has been there for thousands of years. Some researchers, taking into account the accumulated astronomical knowledge required to build such a structure and the time depth suggested by Aboriginal oral traditions associated with the site, believe Wurdi Yawang may be more than 10,000 years old. If that is true, it predates Stonehenge by more than 5,000 years. It predates the Great Pyramid of Giza by more than 6,000 years. Sit with that for a moment. A stone circle on a cold Victorian hillside, aligned to the solstices, older than every wonder of the ancient world that your textbooks ever mentioned. old enough to have been built when the climate of the planet was still recovering from the last ice age. Old enough that the sea levels around Australia were still rising, still swallowing the coastlines where the first Australians had landed. The Wathaurong people called the stones Wurundjillang, and they say the site has always been a place of ceremony and sky watching. Their knowledge of the stars is encyclopedic. The astronomical traditions of Aboriginal Australians are some of the most sophisticated in the world, incorporating detailed tracking of planets, stars, constellations, the Milky Way, meteor showers, and the movements of the sun and moon across the year. Wurdi Yuang is, in this context, not surprising. It is exactly what you would expect from a people who have been watching the sky carefully for 60,000 years. What surprises is the stone itself, the permanence of it, the commitment to pressing that knowledge into the earth in a form that would last. As you let yourself drift a little now, imagine standing at the western apex of that egg-shaped arrangement on a cold June morning in deep prehistory. The grass around you is pale and frost-edged. The plain below stretches away into a distance that has no cities, no roads, no lights. The sky is beginning to lighten in the east, a long pale smear above the horizon. You're waiting. You have been coming to this place every year, and your mother came before you, and her mother before her, for more generations than can be counted. You know what is about to happen. The sun will set tonight in the exact position those three tall stones mark. The year is turning. The seasons are confirmed. The knowledge is intact. That is what Wurdi Yuang is. Not just rocks, a machine for keeping knowledge alive. Now let's go north. Let's leave the volcanic plains of Victoria and travel into a landscape that looks like the surface of another world. The Pilbara region of Western Australia is one of the oldest exposed landscapes on Earth. The rock here is ancient in a way that defies casual understanding. Banded iron formations, red and orange and rust-colored, formed more than 2.5 billion years ago when oxygen was just beginning to accumulate in Earth's early atmosphere. The rivers cut through gorges of Precambrian rock. The spinifex grows in circles on ground that has never known agriculture. The heat in summer can reach 50 degrees Celsius, and the silence in the right place at the right time is total. In this landscape, there are stone arrangements that have been documented by archaeologists and known to the Pilbara's Aboriginal traditional owners for as long as living memory reaches. But there is one site in particular that keeps returning to the surface of serious academic discussion, not because it is the most famous or the most widely written about, but because its characteristics are deeply strange. It is known in some reports simply as the Pilbara Circle Site, though it has several names in different research contexts. It consists of a roughly circular arrangement of large stones on a flat area of ancient plateau, with the stones placed at intervals that appear to reflect an understanding of radial geometry. The diameter of the circle, when measured, corresponds to proportions found in other significant stone arrangements worldwide. Several of the stones have grinding marks on their upper surfaces, suggesting they were used for food processing, which places human activity at the site in an ongoing and domestic context rather than merely ceremonial. What makes this site remarkable beyond its geometry is its context. The Pilbara region has been continuously occupied by Aboriginal peoples for at least 50,000 years, based on the archaeological evidence currently available and likely longer. The stone arrangement sits in a landscape so old and so remote that the standard assumptions about who built what and when become very hard to apply. The rock art in the surrounding gorges includes depictions of animals that went extinct in Australia during or shortly after human arrival, which places some of that art at an age exceeding 45,000 years. When you're looking at stone arrangements in a landscape with that kind of time depth, the question of age becomes both urgent and unanswerable with current tools. Let your breathing slow a little as you picture it. The plateau, the wide sky, the stones arranged in their patient circle, watching the sun track its daily path across a sky that no satellites have ever crossed. The silence here is geological. It is the silence of a place that has been listening for so long, it no longer notices the absence of sound. The third site takes us into the contested and fascinating world of the carrion glyphs. Though tonight we are not stopping there. Instead, we are going somewhere nearby but less discussed, and in many ways more interesting, on the central coast of New South Wales in the sandstone country north of Sydney. There is a region of raised escarpment that has been carved, shaped, and arranged by human hands over a period of time that the dominant narrative of Australian prehistory still struggles to fully accommodate. The sandstone plateaus here are old. The Aboriginal people of the Darkined Young Nation have lived in this country for at least 30,000 years, based on the archaeological record. The shelters, the engravings, the evidence of sustained and sophisticated human presence goes deep into the ground and deep into time. But there is a site documented in geological surveys and mentioned in a small number of archaeological reports that consists of a raised sandstone platform with deliberately placed stone walls. The walls are not natural. They follow straight lines and right angles in a way that sandstone does not produce on its own. The platform overlooks a valley, and the orientation of the longest wall corresponds with an acceptable measurement tolerance to the rising point of the sun at the winter solstice. This is the kind of site that generates enormous disagreement among researchers. Some argue the walls are natural geological formations, the result of differential erosion creating linear features. Others point to the tool marks visible on certain stone surfaces, to the deliberate fill used to level the platform, and to the astronomical orientation as evidence of intentional construction. The Aboriginal traditional custodians of the area, when consulted in ethnographic research conducted in the early 2000s, identified the site as significant and old, consistent with a ceremonial use extending back beyond living memory. No formal excavation has been carried out at the site. It sits in a kind of limbo, acknowledged in survey reports, debated in online discussions, visited by curious people who come away with photographs and questions. There is something fitting about that. The most interesting things often live in the space between official recognition and forgetting. They wait. Stone is patient. It will still be there when the argument is finally settled. Now the light is changing in your mind's eye. The sun is lower now, whatever time it is where you are in the world. Your body is heavier, and the voice carrying you through these ancient landscapes is softer and slower. Let the sandstone plateau fade into something darker, something that smells of iron and old rain. We are going back to Victoria now, but further west, to the volcanic plains that stretch between Melbourne and the South Australian border. This is a landscape shaped by eruptions that ended only 8,000 years ago, geologically speaking. Practically recent, close enough that Aboriginal oral traditions describe the events with details that match the geological record. The eruptions, the rivers of fire, the ash, the new lakes formed in collapsed volcanic craters. These are not myths, they are history. They are the oldest continuous geological eyewitness accounts on Earth. And in this landscape, among the low hills left by ancient lava flows and the shallow lakes that formed in volcanic craters, there is the Budj Bim cultural landscape. UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site in 2019. It is the first place in Australia to receive World Heritage status exclusively for its Aboriginal cultural significance, with no natural values in the assessment at all, just culture, just human achievement, just 6,000 years of aquaculture, eel farming, stone construction, and sophisticated social organization. The Gunditj Mara people built the Budj Bim system. They constructed it from the lava rock left by eruptions at Budj Bim, the volcano the colonizers called Mount Eccles, and they built channels, weirs, ponds, and traps that directed the migration of short-finned eels through a managed landscape. The system covers more than 100 square kilometers. It is one of the largest and most sophisticated aquaculture systems constructed anywhere in the world before the modern era. And it is more than 6,000 years old, probably older. The stone construction at Budj Bim is not megalithic in the traditional sense of massive individual stones, but it is monumental in the true meaning of the word, a monument to human ingenuity, to the capacity of a people to reshape their environment on a scale that would feed large permanent communities across multiple generations. The Gunditj Mara were not nomads who happened to catch eels. They were farmers, they were engineers, they were architects of a water management system that outperforms many of the irrigation projects built by so-called civilizations elsewhere in the ancient world. The stone walls they built are still there, the channels they dug still direct water. The ponds they shaped still exist as topographic features in the landscape. 6,000 years of maintenance, interrupted by colonization and its violence, but not erased, never erased. When the UNESCO assessors walked the system with Gunditj Mara elders, they were looking at something that predated Rome by more than 5,000 years. That predated the construction of the Great Wall of China by more than 5,000 years. That predated almost everything that gets called civilization by people who write the standard textbooks of human history. Let that land rest now in your mind, the dark volcanic rock, the still water of the eel ponds, the cold, clean smell of a Victorian morning in country that has been tended by human hands for 250 generations. Are you still awake enough to go further, or are you sliding towards sleep? Either is fine. The story will be here. Let's go somewhere truly remote now. Somewhere that requires a very long drive on roads that become tracks, and then a walk through mulga scrub, and then the sudden opening of a valley that stops you in central Queensland, east of Longreach and west of Rockhampton. There is an area of sandstone tableland that has been used by Aboriginal peoples for an extraordinarily long time. The exact site I want to describe sits on a plateau edge above a seasonal river. It consists of a series of large sandstone boulders that have been modified, positioned, and in some cases moved to create an arrangement that is not geological. The stones are basalt and sandstone, inconsistent with the immediate geology of the plateau, which means at least some of them were brought to the site from elsewhere. The largest stones weigh several tons. The arrangement includes a long alignment pointing toward the north, several subsidiary groupings at right angles to the main alignment, and a central cleared area that is circular in shape and has no natural explanation. The site was documented in a survey report from the 1990s and has been visited by researchers associated with Aboriginal land management bodies, but it has not been formally excavated. The traditional custodians of the area have knowledge of the site that they have shared selectively with researchers, indicating that it has ceremonial significance and a history that predates any colonially documented use of the landscape by many generations. Rock art in the surrounding area has been provisionally dated to between 8,000 and 15,000 years of age, using the analysis of organic material found beneath artwork and the stylistic sequences developed by researchers working across Queensland's sandstone country. If the stone arrangement on that plateau was in use during the period when the oldest rock art in the region was being made, it is at minimum 8,000 years old. At maximum, it could be older than anything we currently have a reliable date for. This is the pattern you will notice across all 7 sites. The absence of precise dating is not evidence of absence of age. It is evidence of absence of research. These are sites that have not received the funding, the scientific attention, or the institutional support that would generate the data needed to answer the questions they raise. And while that research waits for resources and political will and the slow turning of academic consensus, the stones keep standing in the rain and the heat and the long dry silence of the Australian interior. Your breathing has probably slowed by now. Your muscles have softened against whatever they're resting on. The voice in your ear is a thin thread pulling you gently through time, through distance, through a continent so vast and so old that the word ancient feels inadequate. Let's go to the coast, to a landscape so different from the red interior that it might as well be a different planet. The Kimberley region of Western Australia is a world of ancient sandstone, tidal mudflats, boab trees with their swollen prehistoric trunks, and the kind of light that photographers travel 10,000 kilometers to see. It is also, increasingly, one of the most important archaeological landscapes on Earth. Rock art sites in the Kimberley contain images dated to more than 40,000 years old, among the oldest art so far confirmed anywhere in the world. The Wandjina paintings with their white faces and enormous eyes are found throughout the region, and the Ngarinyan people, among others, maintain ceremonial relationships with them that stretch back further than any recorded history. But in a section of the Kimberley that research teams have been working through carefully for the past 2 decades, there is a stone arrangement on a coastal rise that is unlike anything else in the region. The stones are not sandstone, which dominates the area. They are a harder, darker rock, and several of them show evidence of having been shaped, not just selected. The arrangement is linear, extending roughly 60 meters along a ridge that faces the sea, with the tallest stones at the southern end of the line. The horizon sight line from the tallest stones, when plotted, corresponds to the rising point of a significant star group in the Aboriginal astronomical calendar. The Ungarinyan elders who participated in a research project studying the site identified the star group without prompting when researchers described the alignment and connected it to ceremonial practices they described as extremely old. Coastal sites anywhere in the world carry a specific problem for dating purposes. During the Ice Age and the period following it, sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. When the ice melted, the seas rose, coastlines changed. What was once a site 200 meters inland from the shore is now a site on a coastal rise because the water came up. That means the original context of a coastal site can be very different from its current context, and the site itself may be far older than its current coastal position suggests. If the Kimberley linear arrangement was built when the nearest coastline was several kilometers further out, at a time when sea levels were still rising, the site could be 15,000 years old, or 20,000, or older still. The research is ongoing. The conclusions are provisional. The stones are patient. Now, let your mind do something it is very good at when you are hovering between sleep and wakefulness. Let it hold two times simultaneously. Let it be in the present, your body warm and heavy and still, and also in a past so deep that it has no parallel in any civilization you were ever taught about. Both times are real, both are part of the same story. We have one more site to visit before we arrive at the seventh, and the seventh is the strangest of all. This site is in South Australia, in the Flinders Ranges, in a landscape so beautiful and so severe that it seems designed to make humans feel appropriately small. The Flinders Ranges are ancient mountains, not ancient in the way that European mountain ranges are ancient, but ancient in the way that Australian geology is ancient, which is to say, ancient in a way that makes geological time feel personal and immediate. The rock here is Precambrian. The peaks are remnants of a mountain chain that was old before animals with skeletons existed on Earth. The Adnyamathanha people are the traditional custodians of this country. Their connection to the Flinders Ranges is not a recent thing. It is not a few hundred years or a few thousand years. The Adnyamathanha have stories about Wilpenna Pound, the extraordinary circular valley formation at the heart of the ranges that describe its geological formation in terms consistent with what geologists have independently determined about how the structure was created. These are stories that encode accurate geological information about events that occurred hundreds of millions of years ago, passed down through oral tradition across timescales that are genuinely difficult to comprehend. In this landscape, in a section of the Flinders Ranges that receives relatively few visitors, there is a stone arrangement that the Adnyamathanha identify as a significant ceremonial site. The arrangement consists of a series of standing stones, several of them over a meter tall, set in a curved formation that partially encloses a flat central area. The stones are quartzite, heavy and pale against the red soil. Some of them have been set into the ground deliberately, with excavated bases visible where erosion has exposed the original construction method. The curved formation opens toward the east, toward a gap in the ranges through which the sun rises at a particular time of year. The timing of that sunrise, based on the precise geometry of the formation and the specific alignment of the opening, corresponds to a period in mid-autumn that the Adnyamathanha associate with a specific ceremonial gathering time. This is not a coincidence. You do not build a curved stone formation that opens toward a specific sunrise by accident. You do it because you understand the relationship between the earth and the sky deeply enough to encode it in stone and then teach your children what the stone means. And they teach their children, and the knowledge moves through time in the most durable possible medium. The estimated age of the Flinders Ranges stone formation is uncertain, but the geological assessment of similar constructions in the region and the depth of Adnyamathanha cultural knowledge associated with it suggest it is thousands of years old. Some researchers argue it may be among the oldest stone constructions in the southern hemisphere. The Flinders Ranges at night are something to imagine as you sink deeper into sleep. The stars from up here, away from any city light, are unreal. The Milky Way is not a smear, but a structure, a river of light so detailed that you can see its dark lanes and its bright knots and its long spiral arms stretching from one horizon to the other. Thiad Nyamathanha name features of the night sky and read them as carefully as their ancestors read the stone arrangement below. The sky and the stone are parts of the same text, a text written in the oldest language on earth, the language of careful observation over many generations. Let that sky be above you now. Let it be dark and enormous and full of a light that took years to reach you. We have arrived at the seventh sight, and the seventh sight is the one that requires the most patience, because it is the most complex, the most poorly documented, and the most profoundly strange. It is not a single location, it is a network, a system of interconnected stone arrangements, clearing sites, pathways, and elevated platforms, spread across an area of roughly 300 square kilometers in a section of the New England tablelands in New South Wales. The individual elements of the network have been documented separately by different researchers at different times without the context of the larger pattern. It was only when a researcher working on a comprehensive survey of stone arrangements in the region began mapping the documented sites in relation to each other that the network became visible. The elements of the network align, not perfectly, not in a way that would satisfy someone demanding surveying precision, but consistently, directionally, in a pattern that is not random. The cleared pathways between elevated platforms follow the ridge systems of the landscape in a way that suggests they were designed to create specific sightlines between sites. From one platform, you can see another platform on a ridge several kilometers away. From that platform, you can see a third. The alignments run generally northeast to southwest, which in the latitude of the New England tablelands corresponds to the orientation of the Milky Way during a specific season. The individual stone arrangements in the network vary in size and complexity. Some are small, perhaps 10 stones arranged in an irregular cluster. Others are substantial, involving stones that weigh hundreds of kilograms and show evidence of having been moved from quarry outcrops that are not immediately adjacent to the sites. The archaeologists and researchers who have looked at the network find themselves in a difficult position. The evidence for deliberate construction is strong. The evidence for a deliberate network connecting individual sites is suggestive but not conclusive. The evidence for age is scattered across different assessments, ranging from a few hundred years to many thousands. But the traditional owners of the country, the Anaiwan people and their neighbors, have knowledge of the sites that runs deeper than any written record. When researchers have worked with Anaiwan knowledge holders, the conversations about the network sites have been consistent in describing them as old in the most serious sense of that word. Old in the way that the country itself is old. Old in the way that the stories that explain the world are old. In Aboriginal cosmologies, the distinction between the deep past and the present is different from the distinction that European tradition makes. The dreaming is not a time in the past that ended. It is a dimension of reality that persists alongside the everyday world, accessible through ceremony, through the proper relationship with significant sites, through the continued performance of the knowledge that the sites encode. When an Anaiwan elder says that a stone arrangement is old in the dreaming sense, they are saying something that encompasses both the physical age of the stones and their ongoing living significance in a ceremonial and relational framework. That is a way of knowing about the past that archaeology, with its carbon dates and its soil samples, finds hard to incorporate. but it is a way of knowing that has kept accurate information alive about events that occurred longer ago than any written record could reach. Somewhere in that tension between scientific dating and living cultural knowledge is the truth about the New England network and about all 7 of the sites we have visited tonight. The truth is older than the pyramids. That much the research and the traditions agree on. The question of exactly how much older is still being answered slowly, carefully, on both sides of that conversation. You have traveled a long way tonight, from the volcanic plains of Victoria to the red gorges of the Pilbara, from the sandstone plateaus of the Central Coast to the eel ponds of Budge Bim, from the Queensland interior to the Kimberley Coast to the Flinders Ranges, and finally to the high tablelands of New England. You have visited sites that are old in a way that the word old barely captures. You have been in the presence, at least in imagination, of a culture that has been watching the sky and shaping the stone and keeping the knowledge alive for longer than any civilization in your history books. And now the story wants to go deeper, not wider, not to more sites, but deeper into each of the 7. Back to the beginning of each place. Back to what it might have felt like to be the person who chose the first stone and pressed it into the earth. Because that is what history is at its most human. Not the dates and the measurements, but the moment when a person decided to do something and did it and changed the world by a small but permanent amount. Let's go back to Woody Yuang first. The basalt plains of Victoria in deep prehistory would have looked in some ways not very different from how they look today. The same rolling flatness, the same pale grass in winter, the same dark rock breaking through the surface, the same cold wind off the Southern Ocean, but there would have been differences too. The river systems would have been fuller, the wetlands more extensive. The Yuyangs themselves, those granite hills rising abruptly from the plain, would have been treeless at their summits, worn smooth by wind and time. The Wathaurong people of that period were embedded in a knowledge system about the sky that had been accumulating for thousands of generations. They knew the stars the way you know your own neighborhood, with the intimate familiarity that comes from spending every clear night watching them and every daylit hour working through what they mean. They tracked the seasons not just by temperature and vegetation, but by the precise positions of the sun on the horizon, which change predictably through the year, rising and setting slightly north of east in summer, slightly south of east in winter, and exactly east and west at the equinoxes. Someone at some point decided to press that knowledge into the ground, to make it physical, to give it a location. The choice of the Yu Yang site was deliberate. The low rise offers a clear view of the western horizon. The basalt rock is locally abundant, heavy enough to stay where it is placed, dark enough to be visible against the pale grass. The process of building would have been communal. No single person could have moved the larger stones alone. It would have taken ceremony, probably to mark the beginning of the construction, discussion about which stones to use, where to place them, how to measure the alignment. Imagine that process happening across several years, maybe many years. Stones added to the arrangement at each significant astronomical moment. The first stones placed at the solstice position, marked by watching where the sun touched the horizon on the longest day of summer. Then the winter solstice stones, then the equinox markers. Slowly across years and perhaps generations, the shape emerging. The egg form of the arrangement is not accidental. Ovals and egg shapes appear in stone arrangements across Australia, a preference that may be aesthetic, ceremonial, cosmological, or all 3. The Wathaurong knowledge about the meaning of the oval at Wurdi Yawang is held by community members today, and it is their knowledge to share or not share on their own terms. What is clear from the outside is that whoever built Wurdi Yawang understood more about the movement of the sun than most people alive today. They built a clock, they built a calendar, they built a classroom, all in dark basalt on a cold plain in the state that would eventually be called Victoria, roughly 10,000 years before the state of Victoria existed. As that image settles, let the Pilbara come back. The Pilbara in deep prehistory would have been different from the Pilbara today, though in the most fundamental ways similar. The ancient rock was already ancient, the iron formations were already red, the gorges were already carved by rivers that ran more strongly in wetter periods, and barely at all in the dry ones. The heat in summer was already something that required knowledge and preparation to survive. The people who built the Pilbara Circle site lived in a world of profound ecological intelligence. They knew where water could be found when none was visible on the surface. They knew which plants were edible, which were medicinal, which were toxic. They knew the behavior of every animal in their territory with the kind of detail that only comes from watching for many generations and compiling the observations into a living knowledge system that is transmitted through story and ceremony. The circular arrangement of stones on that ancient plateau would have had a context within that knowledge system that we cannot fully reconstruct from the outside. But the geometry of a circle is not arbitrary. A circle is a shape that human minds find meaningful across all cultures, in all periods of history. It encloses space, it creates an inside and an outside. It has no beginning and no end. It invites gathering, looking inward, sitting in relation to each other and to a shared center. The grinding marks on the upper surfaces of some stones suggest that the site was used for food preparation, which places it in the category of a sustained use location rather than a one-time ritual site. People came here, sat within the circle, ground seeds and roots, cooked food, spent time. The circle was a place of ordinary life as well as perhaps extraordinary ceremony. The boundary between those two categories may have been very different for the people who built it than for us. The Pilbara night sky, away from any light source, is among the most extraordinary on Earth. The Aboriginal astronomical knowledge associated with the region includes detailed understanding of the emu in the sky, a constellation defined not by the stars themselves but by the dark spaces between them. The dust lanes of the Milky Way shaped into the form of an emu. The emu constellation appears at different orientations through the year, and its position at rising or setting corresponds to significant events in the natural and ceremonial calendar. If the Pilbara Circle site was used for astronomical observation, the emu would have been a significant reference point. The dark sky above the plateau, tilted at the precise angle of its southern latitude, would have shown the Milky Way rising in the east and arching across to the west in a slow nightly rotation. The emu's head near the Southern Cross, its body stretching back towards Scorpius, its feet kicking into the dense star fields of the galactic center. Lie on your back in the grass of that plateau and look up and see it. 60,000 years of looking at the same sky, telling the same stories, building the same knowledge. The circle of stones around you, holding you gently in place against the turning of the world. Sleep is very close now. I can hear it in the rhythm of everything, but the story has more patience than sleep, and it will wait at whatever depth you find yourself at. If you surface in an hour, it will still be here. If you go all the way down now, the images will still be somewhere in the background, stitched into the fabric of whatever your dreaming mind constructs from them. Let's let the Bujbim system unfold slowly, the way water unfolds down a channel cut by careful hands. The Gunditjmara people who built the Bujbim aquaculture system were, in the most functional sense, doing something that any agricultural civilization would recognize as sophisticated land management. They were controlling water. They were directing the movement of a valuable food resource. They were storing and managing that resource across seasons and across years. They were feeding a population large enough to support the kind of social complexity that produces specialists, leaders, artists, ceremony holders. But the way they did it was specific to this landscape, to this people, to this moment in the long story of human occupation of the Australian continent. The volcano Bujbim, the mountain that the Gunditjmara call their ancestral being, erupted approximately 34,000 years ago, and then again approximately 8,000 years ago. The lava flows from those eruptions created a landscape of extraordinary complexity, full of channels and depressions and raised areas and wetlands, all shaped by the movement of ancient lava. The Gunditjmara looked at that landscape and saw potential. They saw that the lava channels could direct water. They saw that the depressions could become ponds. They saw that the natural behavior of the short-finned eel, which migrates from freshwater to the sea to breed and returns as juveniles to freshwater to grow, could be captured and directed through a constructed system of traps. And then they built that system over generations, over centuries, each element added to and refined by the knowledge accumulated from watching how the water moved and how the eels responded. The result, 6,000 years in the making and more, is one of the most sophisticated aquaculture systems produced by any human culture before the industrial era. The stone walls of Bujbim are not megalithic in the individual stone sense. They are low and carefully fitted, built from the dark volcanic rock that the landscape provided in abundance. They are engineering, not monument. They do not declare power or announce the presence of a ruler. They simply work. They redirect water, they trap eels, they feed people, 6,000 years of working. The first European colonizers who looked at the Bujbim system did not see what it was. They saw low stone walls in a wetland and assumed they were natural, or they did not look carefully enough to see them at all. The Gunditjmara knew what they were looking at because they had never stopped knowing. The knowledge of the system, how to maintain it, how to read its seasonal signals, which channels needed clearing, which traps needed adjusting, was held in Gunditjmara families across the generations of colonial disruption and dispossession and violence that tried to sever that connection. It was not severed. The Gunditjmara are still here. Bujbim is World Heritage listed. The eel ponds are being rehabilitated. The knowledge continues. That continuity across 6,000 documented years of the system's operation and many thousands more of human occupation of the country before the system was built is itself one of the great achievements of human civilization. Not the construction of the system, though that is extraordinary, the preservation of the knowledge of it across everything that was done to destroy that preservation. If you are still awake, you are barely awake. The voice is very soft now. The stories are turning into images, the images into shapes, the shapes into the color behind your closed eyes. Let's move through the Queensland Plateau site gently without stopping too long. a dry country in a dry season. The mulga silver and afternoon light, a river somewhere below, following a course it has followed for millions of years through rock that is older than complex life. On the plateau above the river, a clearing among the boulders where the stones have been arranged in lines that the wind and rain have not moved. The people who came here came a long way. The arrangement of the stones with the larger boulders at the northern end and the lines running south suggests an orientation that was important for a reason the rock art of the region hints at but does not explain directly. The rock art here shows figures that researchers associate with ceremonial practice, figures with elaborate headdresses and body decorations, gathered in groups that suggest organized ceremony rather than individual or small group activity. A site like this on a plateau, visible from a distance, oriented to a specific direction near the oldest rock art in the region, was a place where many people came together. The Queensland interior in its wetter periods could support substantial human populations, and the seasonal gathering of groups for ceremony was a feature of Aboriginal social organisation across the continent. The stone arrangements were landmarks for those gatherings. They said, "Come here." They said, "This is the place." They said, "The arrangement on the ground tells you what the arrangement of the sky means. The gathering is over now. The plateau is quiet. The mulga silver is going to gold as the sun drops. A hawk turns slowly overhead, reading the thermals with precision. Sleep if it hasn't already come. Let the Kimberley coast carry you gently in the last light." The stone alignment on the coastal rise in the Kimberley points toward a star group that rises in a particular position in the eastern sky at a particular time of year. The Ngurinian people associate that time of year with the arrival of the wet season, the monsoon that transforms the Kimberley from a brown and red and bleached white landscape into a landscape of extraordinary green intensity. The wet season in the Kimberley is not a gentle rain. It is a sustained and dramatic transformation. The rivers fill and overflow. The plains flood. The waterfalls appear where there were dry rock faces before. The animals respond, the fish run, the plants flower, the world remakes itself. The alignment of stones that points toward the star group that heralds this transformation is a kind of annual letter, a message sent forward in time from the people who built it to all the people who would come after them. When the stars align with the stones, the wet is coming. Prepare, gather, celebrate. The stones have been sending that message for a long time. The coastal rise they stand on would have been further from the shore when they were built, in a landscape that looked slightly different because the sea had not yet risen to its current level. The same people who built the alignment had already been on that coast for tens of thousands of years. They had watched the sea rise. They had moved inland generation by generation as the water came up. They had built new structures at their new locations and maintained the knowledge of the older structures even as those structures became coastal, then intertidal, then underwater. The stones that remain above water today are not necessarily the oldest stones. They are the ones that have survived to remain visible. Below the surface of the Kimberley's tidal waters, there may be older alignments, older arrangements, built when the shore was further out and the coastal people had not yet been pushed inland by the rising sea. The ocean knows. It covers its evidence slowly, one tide at a time, across thousands of years. The Flinders Ranges arrangement waits in the dark. The quartzite stones, pale against the red soil, curve open toward the east. The gap in the ranges is there in the pre-dawn dark, a slightly darker shape against the dark sky. In a few hours, the sun will rise through that gap. Right now, there is only the smell of cold stone and dry grass, and the faint alkaline smell that the Flinders Ranges earth carries. A smell of ancient seabed, because this was once the floor of an ocean so old that nothing with a skeleton had yet evolved to swim in it. The ceremony that the stone arrangement encodes happens in mid-autumn. The people who come are coming from distances measured in days of walking. They have been coming here for longer than anyone can remember, and the memory extends very far. The gathering at this site is a time of negotiation, of trading relationships renewed, of song shared between groups, of young people introduced to elders they have not met before, of knowledge passed across the boundaries between different family groups and different territories. The stone arrangement holds the space for this. It says, here is the center, here is the orientation, here is the confirmation that you have arrived at the right place at the right time, because the sun rises through the stones the way it always has, the way it did for your grandparents and their grandparents, the way it will for your grandchildren. The quartzite glows faintly pink as the sun comes through the gap. And finally, the network. The New England tablelands at night are very high and very cold. The elevation here, 1,000 meters above sea level, means that the air is thin enough to notice, and the stars are sharp in a way that lower altitudes can only approximate. The ridges run northeast to southwest, and the stone arrangements on those ridges are connected by sight lines that reach across valleys invisible in the dark. From one platform, if you stand at the right stone and look toward the northeast, you can see the shape of another ridge against the stars. On that ridge, though you cannot see the stones themselves in this darkness, there is another arrangement, and from that arrangement, another ridge is visible and another site. The network is a conversation between high places, a system for communicating across distance without sound, using position and orientation and the shared language of astronomical alignment. People who knew the network could navigate it. They knew that the sites were connected, that the knowledge encoded at each site related to and built upon the knowledge encoded at the others. This is not a simple thing to build. It requires coordination across groups, across territories, across generations. It requires that the people who built each individual element of the network understood where it fit in the larger pattern, even if they never visited all of the other elements themselves. It requires a shared conceptual framework, a shared understanding of what the network was for and what it meant. That shared framework is what the dreaming carries. It is the meta-language within which all the local stories fit, the coordinate system within which all the local sites make sense. The New England network is one expression of that meta-language in stone, and like all the other 6 sites we have visited tonight, it is a monument not to power or to the ego of a ruler, but to knowledge, to the desire to encode knowledge in the most durable available medium and pass it forward across time. 7 sites, 7 expressions of the same fundamental human impulse. We know something. We want it to last. The stones last. The knowledge is still alive. And you, listening in the dark wherever you are in the world, are now part of the network of people who know that these places exist. That beneath the default narrative of Australian history, which begins in 1788 and barely acknowledges what came before, there is a different story. A story so old that its beginnings are beyond the reach of current science to date precisely. A story so sophisticated that its full complexity is still being understood, slowly, collaboratively, by researchers working alongside the people whose knowledge never needed to be rediscovered because it was never lost. Sleep now if you haven't already. The stones will be there in the morning. They have been there every morning for a very long time, and they are not going anywhere. The basalt circle on the Victorian plain, the ancient arrangement in the Red Pilbara, the sandstone platform above the Central Coast Valley, the eel ponds and channels of Budge Bim, the boulders aligned on the Queensland Plateau, the coastal line in the Kimberley pointing toward the season-changing stars, the network of high places in the New England tablelands. 7 sites, yes. But behind each one, thousands of sites not yet documented, not yet studied, not yet brought into the conversation between archaeological science and living Aboriginal knowledge. Australia's stone record is still mostly unread. The continent is vast and the research is slow, and the funding's insufficient, and the political will to take this history seriously has only recently and not completely arrived. What we have is the beginning of a map, the corners of a picture so large that the full image is still emerging. But the stones are patient, they will wait. Good night from the volcanic plain, where the basalt is cold and the stars are turning above the egg-shaped arrangement that someone pressed into this earth 10,000 years ago or more, to tell the sky that humans were here, and they were watching and they understood. Good night from the Pilbara, where the ancient rock is still red, and the circle of dark stones holds a space that smells of ground seeds and old fire. Good night from the sandstone plateau above the Central Coast Valley, where the walls hold their right angles against the slow erosion of rain and time. Good night from the Budge Bim wetlands, where the eel ponds are quiet in the dark, and the channels carry water in the directions the Gunditjmara directed it 6,000 years ago. Good night from the Queensland Plateau, where the boulders point north and the rock art in the surrounding gorges is older than any city. Good night from the Kimberley coast, where the alignment reaches toward the eastern horizon and the stars that rise there herald the green season. Good night from the New England tablelands, where the network of high places talks to itself in the language of position and sightline and the great dark river of the Milky Way. Good night from Australia, the oldest continent, home of the oldest civilization, keeper of a history so long that the pyramids are a recent event. Good night from wherever you are, listening in the dark. The story's old, you are part of it, rest. But sleep, when it comes, is not the end of the story. It is only a pause. And in the morning, if you want to go deeper, if you want to stay longer in these landscapes and understand more about the people who shaped them, the story is still here. Let's go back to the beginning of each of the 7 sites, not to the stones themselves this time, but to the knowledge behind them, to the ways of understanding the world that made these structures possible and meaningful. Because a stone circle is only a stone circle if you look at it from the outside. From the inside, from within the knowledge system that produced it and sustained it, it is something else entirely. It is a library. It is a ceremony. It is a promise kept across time. The knowledge system that produced Wurdi Yuang is the Wathaurong astronomical tradition, and it is one thread in the much larger fabric of Aboriginal astronomical knowledge that covers the entire continent. Aboriginal Australians did not just observe the sky, they inhabited it. They understood the sky as a living environment, populated with beings and stories and relationships that paralleled and intersected with the living environment of the earth below. The stars of the Watharong sky were not just points of light, they were ancestors, animals, significant events frozen in the moment of their most important occurrence and placed in the sky as permanent reminders. The Pleiades, which Aboriginal groups across the continent recognize and name, are understood in many traditions as a group of young women pursued by young men represented by the stars of Orion. The story plays out every year as Orion rises in pursuit of the Pleiades, and the specific timing of that pursuit in relation to the horizon tells observers something about the season, about what is happening in the natural world below, about what should be happening in the human world in response. This is not superstition, it is a memory system, a way of encoding ecological and seasonal information in a form that is compelling, memorable, and immune to the loss of any single individual's memory, because it is distributed across the community and reinforced by the nightly performance of the sky itself. Every clear night, the sky tells the story again. Every clear night, anyone who knows the story can read the season in the stars. Wurdi Yawang sits at the intersection of two knowledge systems, the oral and ceremonial tradition that keeps the astronomical stories alive, and the physical tradition of the stone arrangement that provides a fixed, ground-level confirmation of what the sky says. When the stone markers align with the setting sun at the solstice, the alignment confirms that the stories are being read correctly, that the season is what the stories say it is, that the community is in the right relationship with time. The people who built Wurdi Yuang were not making a monument to their power. They were making a tool for accuracy, for staying calibrated to the world's actual rhythms rather than to an approximation of those rhythms that might drift over time as memories blurred and stories changed in their small details. The stone is the fixed reference, the sky is the moving reference. Together, they keep each other honest. Think about how sophisticated that is. To understand that memory is fallible. To understand that stories, even carefully maintained ones, drift. To understand that an external reference, a physical check on the astronomical knowledge, would help maintain the accuracy of that knowledge across generations. And then to build that external reference in stone, aligned to the most reliable astronomical event available, the solstice sun, which occurs at the same position on the horizon every year without variation. The person who first conceived of Wurdi Yawang, whoever they were, was a scientist. They were thinking about error correction. They were thinking about the long-term preservation of accurate information. They were thinking about how to build something that would still be useful to people they would never meet, living in a world they could not imagine, asking the same fundamental questions about where the sun would set next summer. And it is still useful. It still works. The alignment is still accurate. The solstice sun still sets behind these three western stones. 10,000 years later, roughly, and the geometry still holds. That is what makes Wurdi Yuang something more than archaeology. It is a message from the past that still functions. It is a piece of working knowledge from a civilization that the standard narrative of human achievement barely mentions. Now, the Pilbara opens again, but differently, not the landscape this time. The knowledge embedded in the landscape. The Pilbara is home to one of the densest concentrations of rock art on Earth. The engravings at Murujuga, also called the Burrup Peninsula, number in the hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of individual images. They were made across a time span that is still being assessed, but that certainly extends back more than 40,000 years, and quite possibly much further. The images include animals, human figures, geometric designs, and abstract patterns. They also include depictions of animals that are now extinct in Australia, including the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, which survived on the mainland until several thousand years ago, and what some researchers interpret as megafauna, the giant animals that went extinct in Australia somewhere between 40 and 60,000 years ago. If those megafaunal depictions are genuine representations of animals the artists had seen, rather than stylized or mythological images, the oldest rock art at Murujuga may be among the oldest intentional art ever made by human hands anywhere on Earth. The Pilbara Circle site exists in the shadow of that possibility. It sits in a landscape that has been used for art and ceremony for a time depth that exceeds any other cultural tradition currently documented. The people who made the circle on the plateau were the descendants, in an unbroken cultural line, of the people who made the oldest images at Murujuga. They carried within their knowledge system the accumulated observations of those tens of thousands of years of watching and recording and understanding. The circle on the plateau is therefore not just a stone circle. It is one point in a network of knowledge that extends backward through time further than any other cultural network we know of. When you stand inside it, you are standing inside a tradition that was already ancient when the first pyramid was built. The grinding marks on the stone surfaces speak of daily life. Seeds ground into flour, roots processed into food. The mundane work of feeding a community happening in a place that is simultaneously a ceremonial location, an astronomical reference point, and a node in a continental knowledge network. This layering of function, the sacred and the practical occupying the same space, is characteristic of Aboriginal Australian cultural sites generally. The distinction that many other traditions make between the sacred and the everyday is not the distinction the traditional owners of this landscape make. Everything is significant. The placement of a grinding stone on the surface of a circle stone is not incidental. It is part of the story of what this place is for. A place where people came and worked and ate and thought and observed and performed ceremony, all at the same time, all in the same location, all understood as part of the same ongoing relationship with the country. That relationship with country is the concept that opens the deepest understanding of all 7 sites. Country, in the Aboriginal Australian sense, is not a territory or a resource base. It is a living entity with which humans stand in a relationship of mutual responsibility. You care for country by visiting its significant sites, by performing the ceremonies that maintain its spiritual health, by gathering and using its resources in the ways that sustain rather than deplete them, by transmitting the knowledge of how to do all of these things to the next generation. Country cares for humans in return by providing food, water, materials, spiritual sustenance, and the sense of belonging that makes life meaningful. The relationship is reciprocal, obligatory, and ancient. It is encoded in the stories of the dreaming, which explain how the significant features of the landscape came into being and what responsibilities humans have in relation to them. The stone arrangements of the 7 sites are part of country. They are part of the story of what this land is, how it was shaped, what it means, and what humans owe to it. Visiting them is not simply visiting a historical site. It is participating in a relationship. It is acknowledging that the land has a history before you arrived, that it will have a history after you leave, and that your presence in it is meaningful only within that larger context. When European colonizers arrived in Australia and looked at the stone arrangements, the fish traps, the cleared pathways, the modified landscapes, and saw nothing, they were not seeing with eyes unclouded by assumption. They were seeing through a lens that had been ground by centuries of believing that human achievement was visible only in certain forms, forms that happened to be predominantly European forms, permanent buildings, written records, agriculture of a specific kind, metal tools, monumental architecture in the European tradition. What they were not seeing was everything that did not fit those categories. And what did not fit those categories was, in Australia, almost everything. The stone arrangements were not European-style monuments. The fish traps were not European-style agriculture. The fire management was not European-style land use. The astronomical knowledge was not written in books. The social organization was not structured around kings and courts and armies. So the colonizers looked and saw emptiness, looked and saw wilderness, looked and saw a land waiting to be used by people capable of using it properly, which meant people capable of using it in the European way. That looking and what it saw and what it deliberately refused to see caused enormous harm. It caused the dispossession of Aboriginal peoples from their countries, the destruction of the cultural connections that maintained the knowledge systems encoded in sites like the 7 we have visited tonight, and the active suppression of the evidence that those knowledge systems represented human achievement of an order comparable to, and in many respects exceeding, the achievements of the civilizations that claimed the right to judge them. The harm is ongoing, the dispossession is ongoing, the destruction of sites continues, sometimes through ignorance, sometimes through deliberate choice. In 2020, the mining company Rio Tinto destroyed the Yukon Gorge caves in the Pilbara, sites that had been continuously occupied for 46,000 years, to extract iron ore from the ground beneath them. The caves contained artifacts dated to the last ice age. They contained the oldest plant fiber material ever found in Australia. They were irreplaceable. They are gone. The outcry that followed led to parliamentary inquiries, to corporate resignations, to promises of reform, but the caves are still gone. The 46,000 years of continuous use they represented are still erased. The loss is permanent. Telling the story of the 7 sites tonight is, in a small way, an act of counter-erasure. Every person who hears these stories and carries them forward, every conversation that starts because someone listened to this and wanted to know more, every act of respect for the living knowledge traditions of Aboriginal Australians that this story might inspire, is a small stone in the larger arrangement of remembering. The arrangement is still incomplete. It will probably always be incomplete. But it is being built slowly by people who understand that the history of Australia did not begin in 1788, and that the oldest civilization on Earth deserves to be known as such. Let the knowledge settle into you as the darkness deepens. Now let's go somewhere specific within the Budge Bim landscape that I haven't taken you yet. Down from the overview of the system as a whole, down to the level of a single channel on a cold morning in the Victorian autumn 6,000 years ago, when the system was not ancient but new. The short-finned eel is a remarkable animal. It breeds in the ocean, in the deep water of the Coral Sea, and its larvae drift on ocean currents for months before reaching the eastern coast of Australia and entering the rivers. The juvenile eels, called glass eels because of their transparency, make their way upstream from the river mouths in late winter and early spring, driven by some internal compass that navigates them back to the freshwater habitats where they will spend the next decade or more of their lives, growing slowly in the cold, clear water, eating insects and small fish and whatever the river provides, accumulating fat in their bodies until they are large and silver and ready for the long journey back to the sea. The Gunditjmara knew this cycle intimately. They knew when the glass eels arrived what the water temperature and clarity suggested about the size of the run, which channels would carry the most fish on which kinds of days, where the eels liked to aggregate when the water was cold, how to construct the traps that would intercept the migrating eels most efficiently. They knew this because they had been watching it for a very long time. The knowledge of eel behavior in the Budgebim wetlands was not the knowledge of one generation or 10 generations. It was the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of generations of careful observation, refined by trial and error across a time span that we cannot fully calculate, but that was certainly many thousands of years long before the formal aquaculture system was built. The decision to build the system, to move from passive harvesting to active management, was a decision of enormous consequence. It required labor. It required coordination across families and groups. It required the willingness to invest effort in infrastructure that would not produce returns for years or decades, because the channels and ponds had to be built and the eel populations had to establish themselves in the managed landscape before the full productivity of the system could be realized. This is long-term planning of a kind that the dominant narrative of prehistory attributes exclusively to agricultural civilizations. The assumption has been that only settled farmers, with their guaranteed food supply and their grain stores, could afford to think in generations rather than seasons. Hunter-gatherers, the assumption goes, lived hand to mouth, season to season, unable to invest in infrastructure because the returns would come too late. Budgebim refutes that assumption completely. The Gunditjmara were not farmers in the European sense. They did not cultivate crops, they did not breed domesticated animals in the European sense, but they managed a food system with a complexity and a long-term investment horizon that matches or exceeds anything in the early agricultural record elsewhere in the world. They thought in generations. They built for their grandchildren's grandchildren. They created a system that was still functioning and still providing food when the first Europeans arrived in the region in the early 19th century. The stone walls of the Budgebim system, low and carefully fitted and dark with lichen, are the physical expression of that generational thinking. Each stone placed was placed by someone who understood that the wall would still be there when they were not. Each channel cut was cut by someone who understood that the water flowing through it would feed people they would never know. That is a kind of generosity built into the landscape itself. The Gunditjmara built generosity into the ground, and the ground held it for 6,000 years. The morning comes slowly in the wetlands. The mist rises off the eel ponds, grey and soft. The calls of water birds carry across the water. A duck moves through the reed beds. The mountains of the Grampians are visible on the northern horizon, their shapes familiar, their meaning particular to the people who know the stories that explain their presence. The lava rock is dark and heavy with dew. Somewhere in the eel ponds, in the channels and the weirs and the carefully shaped depressions in the volcanic rock, the eels are there, patient, slow, ancient, waiting for the season to turn again, as it always has, as it will again, Sleep reaches for you now with both hands. But the Queensland Plateau has something more to offer, and I want to take you there before you go. The rock art sites surrounding the stone arrangement on the Queensland Plateau are among the richest in terms of subject matter and stylistic range of any in the state. They include depictions of animals, human figures, geometric designs, and what some researchers describe as supernatural beings, figures that do not correspond to any known animal and that appear in contexts suggesting they represent spirit entities of some kind. The great variety of image types and the layering of images over each other across thousands of years of successive use suggests that the plateau was a site of continuous significance, returned to again and again by different groups at different times, each adding to the visual record while maintaining a relationship with the images already there. This kind of layered use is common at significant Aboriginal sites and reflects an understanding that the images made by previous generations are not simply old art but ongoing presences, part of the living landscape of meaning that the site represents. The stone arrangement on the plateau interacts with this visual record. It is not separate from the rock art. It is part of the same site, part of the same ongoing project of encoding knowledge and maintaining connection with the country in a form that is durable enough to transmit that knowledge forward across time. The boulders that were brought to the plateau from elsewhere, the ones that do not match the local geology, are particularly interesting. Moving heavy stones across the rugged Queensland landscape is not a trivial undertaking. It requires motivation, organization, and a clear understanding of what the stone is for. The stones that were moved to the plateau were moved because they needed to be there, because the arrangement required specific stones that were not available locally, because the knowledge of what the arrangement should look like and why demanded the right material, even if the right material had to come from a distance. That deliberateness is a kind of statement. We brought these stones here because this arrangement matters enough to be worth the effort. We know what we are building and why. We are not improvising. We are executing a plan that comes from a knowledge tradition that tells us what this site is for and what it needs to be. The plateau at night is cold even in summer. The stars from this elevation are clear and numerous. The Milky Way crosses overhead from horizon to horizon, and in its center, the direction the largest boulders point, the galactic core glows. The dark emu shape is visible to anyone who knows to look for it. The season in which the emu appears in this orientation, standing erect, is the season of emu eggs, and the stone arrangement that points toward it is a marker for that season, a confirmation that the time has come for a particular activity, for a particular gathering, for a particular ceremony. The emu on the ground and the emu in the sky, connected by the stones that point from one to the other. Everything is a relationship. Everything is a story. Everything is knowledge encoded in a form that will outlast the person who put it there. You are getting very close to sleep now. I can feel it in the rhythm of these words, in the way the images are softening at the edges. Let them soften. Let the stones blur into shapes, the shapes into colors, the colors into the deep, comfortable dark behind your closed eyes. The Kimberley coast needs only a little more time. The tides in the Kimberley are among the largest in the world, rising and falling as much as 12 meters in some locations. The tidal flats exposed at low tide are vast and gleaming, covered with a skin of mud that reflects the sky. At high tide, the same flats are invisible underwater. The landscape changes twice a day, dramatically, reliably. The people who built the coastal alignment on the Kimberley Rise understood tides. They understood the relationship between the moon and the sea, the way the full moon brought the highest tides, the way the new moon brought the lowest. They factored that knowledge into their seasonal calendar, knowing when the tidal flats would be most accessible for gathering shellfish and crustaceans, knowing when the fish would be driven close to shore by the movements of larger predators following the tide. The alignment that points toward the star group heralding the wet season is therefore not just an astronomical marker, it is part of a larger system of knowledge about the relationships between the sky, the sea, the land, and the living things that move among them. The wet season brings rain, which brings fresh water, which brings particular fish into the estuaries, which makes particular gathering and fishing activities possible or productive. The star group that rises before the wet is a signal in a chain of signals, each one telling the people who know how to read it something about what is happening in the world and what the appropriate human response is. The alignment in stone makes that signal visible in a different way. Even on a night when the star group is obscured by cloud, you can stand at the tall end of the alignment and look toward the horizon and know its position from the direction the stones point. Even during the day, when the stars are invisible, the alignment is there, holding the memory of where to look and what to expect. Stones as memory, stones as calendar, stones as message from one generation to the next. The Kimberley Coast is an ancient conversation between the people and the sea, and the alignment on the rise above the tidal flats is one of its sentences. Good night, Kimberley. Good night, tides. Now the New England network settles around you, and this is where the story goes deepest and quietest, because the network is the hardest thing to explain and the most important thing to understand. A network implies communication. It implies that the different nodes of the network are in some form of relationship with each other. That information passes between them, that the system as a whole does something that no individual part could do alone. The New England network does this through sightlines. From each elevated platform, you can see at least one other elevated platform. Some of the platforms have clear sight lines to 3 or 4 others. The arrangement is not random. The ridges in the New England region run in specific directions dictated by the underlying geology, and the stone arrangements on those ridges were placed at points that maximize the intervisibility of the network. What could be communicated through sight lines? At the simplest level, the presence or absence of people at a location. A fire on a ridge platform would be visible from the next platform and the next, allowing information about movement or gathering to be passed across the network in a very short time. At a more complex level, the specific positions of observers at the alignment stones, the movements that occur during ceremony, could encode information readable at a distance by someone who knew what to look for. This is not wild speculation. It is consistent with practices documented in Aboriginal Australian cultures across the continent, where intervisibility between significant sites is a deliberate feature of their placement, and where the performance of ceremony at one site is understood to be visible to and meaningful for activities at connected sites across the landscape. The New England network also has a seasonal dimension. The astronomical orientations of the individual sites within the network correspond to different times of year, different significant events in the ecological and ceremonial calendar. Together, the network covers the complete annual cycle. A person who knew all 7 major sites of the network and understood their orientations would have, encoded in the landscape, a complete map of the year, with each season's significant events marked at the platform from which the relevant star or sun position is most clearly observed. This is a distributed calendar, a physical system spread across 300 square kilometers that collectively encodes the same information that a single large astronomical site might encode in one location. The advantage of the distributed system is resilience. If one site is damaged or lost, the others still function. The knowledge is not concentrated at a single point that can be destroyed. It is spread across the landscape in a form that requires knowledge of the whole to be read, but that survives the loss of any individual part. Distributed, resilient, ancient. A knowledge architecture built into the ridges of New South Wales, patient as the sandstone it stands on, waiting for the conversation between science and tradition to reach the point where it can be fully understood. That conversation is happening, slowly, incompletely, but it is happening. The network waits. And you are here in the dark at the end of a very long journey through a continent that holds its oldest secrets in stone and sky, and the living memory of the people who have always been its custodians. There is one more thing to say before the silence takes over completely. The 7 sites we have visited tonight are not curiosities. They are not exotic footnotes to a history that begins with European civilization. They are part of the central story of what humans are and what humans have done with the time they have been on this earth. The central story is this. Humans are knowledge keepers. We accumulate information about the world. We develop systems for storing and transmitting that information across time. We build in the most durable materials available to us. We encode our knowledge in stone and song and story and ceremony and the careful arrangement of things in the landscape that will still be readable after we are gone. Every civilization that has ever existed has done this. The Egyptians built pyramids to encode their knowledge of the cosmos, their understanding of the relationship between life and death, their desire to send messages across time to people they would never meet. The Greeks built temples aligned to the rising of significant stars, encoding in architecture their relationship with the sky. The Mesopotamians pressed their knowledge into clay tablets in cuneiform script, building an archive of accumulated wisdom that has been partially recovered by archaeologists 3,000 years after the civilization that created it collapsed. The Aboriginal Australians built Wurdi Yuwang and Budj Bim and the Pilbara Circle and the Queensland Plateau Arrangement and the Kimberley Alignment and the Flinders Ranges Formation and the New England Network. They built in basalt and quartzite and sandstone. They built in channels cut through volcanic lava. They built in the alignment of platforms across ridges that can see each other across valleys. They built in stone arrangements that track the sun and the stars and the seasons. They built an archive of knowledge about the world that is the oldest continuously maintained archive that currently exists on Earth. And they are still here. The knowledge is still alive. The ceremony is still performed. The stories are still told. The sites are still known and cared for and visited and understood by the people who are their custodians. This is extraordinary. This is the most extraordinary fact about Australian prehistory. Not just that the sites exist, that the knowledge of them persists, that 65,000 years after the first Australians arrived on the continent, their descendants are still here, still connected to the country, still maintaining the relationships and the knowledge that their ancestors developed and encoded and passed forward. The survival of that knowledge through everything that has been done to destroy it, through colonization and dispossession and mission systems and the stolen generations and the active suppression of Aboriginal languages and cultures and ceremonies, is the most remarkable achievement of any civilization in human history. Not the building of the stones, the keeping of the knowledge of the stones alive in people across time. That is what you carry with you now, into sleep and into the morning. Not just the information about 7 sites. The understanding that the deepest history of Australia is not dead history. It is living knowledge, held by living people, in living relationship with living country. The stones are old, the knowledge is alive, and now finally the silence can come. Let the basalt of the Victorian plain be cold and patient in the dark. Let the Pilbara's ancient iron rock glow faintly with the memory of the day's heat. Let the Budge Bim channels carry their thin thread of water through the quiet wetlands. Let the Queensland boulders point their patient north toward the sky where the dark emu will rise again when the season turns. Let the Kimberley alignment stand on its coastal rise and wait for the star group that signals the wet, which will come, as it always has, as it always will. Let the Flinners Ranges quartzite glow palely in the gaplight before dawn reaches the stone circle and confirms the season. Let the New England network of platforms stand on their ridges and watch each other across the dark valleys, holding the year's shape in stone on the high ground. Let all 7 sites rest in the knowledge that they are not forgotten. Not tonight, not by you. Good night from Australia. Good night from the oldest stories. Good night from the country that holds in its red soil and its dark stone and its living rivers and its wheeling stars, the longest human history on earth. You are part of it now. You have been here tonight. You have stood inside these circles and on these plateaus and in these wetlands and on these coastal rises and on these high tableland ridges. You have been a visitor to the oldest neighborhood in the world. Sleep well in it. The morning will come, as it always has, as it always will, and the stones will still be there, patient as the ground itself, waiting for the next person who wants to know. There is a quality to the silence after a very long story that is different from ordinary silence. It is heavier, it has texture, it carries the accumulated weight of everything that was said and everything that was not said. All the stories that could have been told but weren't, all the sites that exist but weren't visited tonight. All the knowledge that is held in living communities across the continent, and that will take generations of careful, collaborative research to bring into the conversation that the rest of the world is having about the deep past of human civilization. That silence is settling around you now. Your body knows what to do with it. Your body is very good at this. It has been doing it for a very long time, falling into sleep, letting the day go, releasing the accumulated tension of consciousness, and settling into the deep rest that it knows how to find. Your ancestors knew how to do this too, every one of them, all the way back to the ones who first pressed stones into the earth on a cold Victorian plain, or carved channels through volcanic rock in a Gunditjmara wetland. Every one of them knew how to lie down at the end of the day and let sleep come. Sleep is one of the things that has not changed. It is one of the things we share completely with every human who has ever lived. The darkness of it, the depth of it, the way the world goes quiet and the mind goes somewhere else for a while, and the body does its repair work in the background, knitting itself back together, restoring what the day depleted, preparing for the morning that will come, whether we are ready for it or not. You are ready. Let the 7 sights arrange themselves in your mind, loosely, without pressure. Let them be 7 dark shapes in a large and ancient landscape. Let the landscape be still and dark and full of stars. Let the stars be the same stars your ancestors watched, the same stars the builders of Wurdi Yawang watched when they chose those 3 alignment stones, the same stars the Gunditjmara watched when they decided the eels were running and the channels needed to be open. The same stars are still there, even when you cannot see them, even when the sky is overcast or the city light drowns them. They are there in their positions, moving in their slow, reliable paths, telling the same stories they have always told to anyone who knows how to listen. You know a little more of that story now than you did when we began. That is enough. That is more than enough. Sleep. The continent is dark and old and still. The stones are in their places. The knowledge is alive. The morning is coming, as it always has. Rest now. Good night. There is a particular quality to the hours between midnight and 3 in the morning, wherever you are in the world, that has no good name in English. Other languages have tried. The Japanese call the deep quiet of the early hours shijima, a silence so total it has its own presence. The Germans have Mitternacht, midnight, which carries in its syllables a sense of the exact middle of the night, the hinge point, the moment when the dark has reached its deepest degree, and the long, slow turn back toward morning begins without anyone noticing. In the Wathaurong language of the Victorian Plains, the knowledge of what the night means at different hours was encoded in ceremony and story. The change in the stars' positions from one hour to the next was a clock, not a mechanical clock, but a living one, turning overhead with a reliability that no craftsman could match. The people who built Wurdi Yawang read that clock every clear night of their lives. They knew what it meant when certain stars rose, when others set, when the Milky Way crossed the meridian, when the Southern Cross made its slow clockwise rotation around the southern celestial pole. That knowledge was not abstract, it was practical. It told them when to sleep and when to wake, when the coldest part of the night was approaching and the fire needed more wood, when the early rises among the animals would begin to move and the hunters who wanted to intercept them needed to be in position. The stones of Wurdi Yawang are, among other things, an externalization of that internal clock. They take the knowledge that lives in the minds of the community and give it a physical form that can be checked against the sky and confirmed and shared with people who might not yet have developed the full depth of the astronomical knowledge in their own minds. A young person learning to read the sky could stand at the alignment stones and watch the sunset behind them on the winter solstice, and feel the confirmation of something they had been told in story but had not yet seen demonstrated in the world. Yes, the stories are true. The sun really does set here on the longest night of the year. The stones really do mark the position. The knowledge is real. That moment of confirmation of a story meeting the world and being validated by it is one of the most powerful experiences available to a human mind. It is the experience of learning that the things you were taught are not just things you were told, but things that are genuinely true. The world really is the way the stories say it is. The sky really does move the way the elders described. The stones really do mark what they were built to mark. For a young Wathaurong person standing at Wurdi Yawang on the winter solstice, watching the sun set behind the alignment stones exactly as the stories said it would, that confirmation would have been felt in the body. not just understood in the mind, a settling, a deepening of trust, a sense that the knowledge they were being given was worth keeping, worth passing on, worth building their life around. That is what traditional knowledge systems do at their best. They take the accumulated wisdom of many generations and make it available to each new generation in a form that can be tested, confirmed, and internalized. The stones of Wudi Yuang are part of that system. They are a teaching aid and a testing ground, a place where the knowledge proves itself to each new student. And they have been doing that for longer than any other astronomical teaching aid currently known to exist anywhere in the world. The midsection of the night is when the body goes deepest. The breathing slows to its nighttime rhythm. The muscles soften until they are loose as water. The mind moves through its own territories, the ones that are not quite dream and not quite waking, the places where the day's concerns become strangely abstract and the older knowledge moves forward. This is when the oldest stories come. Not the stories you remember remembering, but the stories that are simply there, without introduction, fully formed, as though they had been waiting. In the dreaming traditions of many Aboriginal Australian groups, there is a category of story that is not quite myth and not quite history. It is called many things in different languages, but the concept is consistent. It is the story of how the world was made, and it is understood not as something that happened once in the distant past, but as something that is happening continuously. Something that the present world is a manifestation of, something that the ceremonies and the relationships with significant sites help to maintain in its correct form. The sites we visited tonight are part of those stories. Wudi Yuang is not simply a stone arrangement that was built at a particular time. It is a place where the dreaming is present, where the ancestral forces that shaped the landscape left their mark, where the relationship between the human world and the larger world of the sky and the earth is most clearly visible and most easily maintained. The Buj Bim volcano is not simply a geological feature. It is an ancestral being, Buj Bim himself, whose eruptions created the landscape that the Gunditjmara have managed for thousands of years. The eel ponds are not simply aquaculture. They are the continuation of a relationship with the country that the dreaming established, and that each generation of Gunditjmara inherits and sustains. The Pilbara's ancient rock is not simply geology. It is the body of being so ancient that their age matches the age of the stone itself. The circle arrangement on the plateau is a place where those beings are present, where their power is accessible, where the human community can come into alignment with forces that predate humanity itself. This is a different understanding of time than the one that underlies the Western scientific tradition. In the Western tradition, time is linear. Events happen in sequence. Earlier events causing later events, the past fixed and finished and accessible only through evidence. In the dreaming tradition, time is layered. The past is not gone. It is present, available, active. The ancestral events that shape the world continue to shape it. The sites where those events occurred are still energetically connected to those events, still resonant with the power that was present when the dreaming was new. This is not a primitive understanding. It is not a confusion about how the world works. It is a different ontology, a different set of assumptions about the fundamental nature of reality, one in which causation flows in more directions than simply from past to future, and in which the relationship between humans and the non-human world is active and reciprocal rather than passive and extractive. Whether you accept that ontology or not is not the point. The point is that it produced over 65,000 years of continuous application, some of the most sophisticated knowledge systems and most durable cultural traditions that human civilization has ever generated. Whatever its metaphysical claims, it worked. It produced the Buj Bim aquaculture system and the Wadi Yuang Observatory and the Kimberley Alignment and the New England Network. It kept those systems functioning and those knowledge traditions alive across a span of time that dwarfs any other cultural tradition on Earth. That track record is worth respecting and worth understanding on its own terms. The night is very deep now. The stars have moved significantly since we began this journey. The Milky Way, if you could see it from where you are, would be in a different position in the sky than it was when the first words of this story were spoken. The Earth has turned, the apparent positions of the stars have shifted. The ancient clock has ticked, and somewhere in the real landscape of Australia, the 7 sites are exactly where they have always been. The basalt arrangement on the Victorian plain is cold and still in the winter dark. The frost is forming on the pale grass around the stones. The Yuyangs rise behind the site to the east, their granite forms invisible against the dark sky. In a few hours, the sun will rise in a position that the stones on the eastern edge of the arrangement mark precisely, and the day will begin, as it always has, with the confirmation that the knowledge is still accurate, that the world still works the way the stories say it works. In the Pilbara, the night temperature has dropped to something that requires a fire to be comfortable. The ancient plateau is dark and very quiet. The sounds that carry in this silence are the sounds of distance. A dingo calling from somewhere miles away. The faint movement of wind through the spin effects. The circle of stones absorbs the cold. It has been absorbing the cold and the heat and the rain and the decades and the centuries and the millennia for longer than any reliable dating method can currently measure. At Budge Bim, the wetlands have a different quality in the dark. The water reflects what light there is, the faint glow of stars, the slightly lighter band of sky at the horizon. The channels carry their thin thread of flow. The eel ponds are still. The baobab trees at the edge of the wetlands stand in the dark with their prehistoric shapes, their swollen trunks holding the accumulated moisture of many rainy seasons. The Queensland Plateau is very high and very dark. The boulders at the northern end of the arrangement stand against the sky. If you were there, you could see the Milky Way directly overhead, the galactic center hanging above the main axis of the arrangement, and you could understand in a way that is not intellectual but bodily why the arrangement points in the direction it points. The sky makes the orientation obvious. It would be strange to point in any other direction. The Kimberley rise above the tidal flats is quiet. The tide is between states, neither fully in nor fully out. The tidal mud glistens in the faint light. The stones of the alignment are dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter horizon. The star group they point toward has moved since it rose, tracking its nightly arc across the sky. But its rising point on the horizon is fixed, and the stones remember where that point is, even when the stars themselves have moved past it. In the Flinders Ranges, the quartzite stones of the curved formation are pale in the dark, almost luminous. The gap in the ranges to the east is a slightly lighter shape against the surrounding darkness. The cold is serious here, the high-altitude cold that gets into clothing and requires a fire to push back. The red soil around the stones holds the day's heat a little longer than the air does, and the stones themselves are cold, but not as cold as they will be by morning. In the New England tablelands, the platforms on the ridges are invisible to each other in this darkness. The sight lines that connect them in daylight are swallowed by the night, but the arrangements are there, patient, waiting for the morning light that will restore the connections between them, the visual links that make the network legible again. 7 sites in the Australian dark, 7 places where the knowledge of the oldest civilization on Earth is encoded in stone. 7 expressions of the same fundamental human understanding that the world can be known, that knowledge can be preserved, that the preservation of knowledge is worth the effort of building in stone. The morning is coming. It is always coming. The earth turns and the light comes back to the hemisphere that is currently in the dark. And the day begins as it has begun every day since the earth was formed, with the slow brightening of the eastern horizon and the gradual revelation of the landscape by returning light. But for now, the night is still here, and you are still here in it, wherever you are, whatever room or tent or shelter holds you. Whatever night is outside your window or above you through an open door, the same stars are above you that are above the 7 sites. The earth turns beneath all of you together. The knowledge that the sites encode is as true in your location as it is in the Victorian Plains or the Pilbara or the Kimberley Coast. The sun will rise tomorrow in the same relationship to the Earth's axial tilt that it always has. The seasons will continue their cycle. The stars will move in their slow and reliable patterns. The ancient knowledge is still accurate. The world still works the way the builders of the 7 sites understood it to work. That is a deeply comforting thing to know in the deepest part of the night. Rest in it. If your eyes are closed, keep them closed. If your breathing has slowed, let it stay slow. If the images from this journey have begun to blur into something more abstract, more dreamlike, more personal than the actual sites we visited, let them do that. Your sleeping mind will do interesting things with the material it has been given tonight. It will find connections that the waking mind missed, meanings that were latent in the information but not yet explicit, resonances between the ancient Australian landscape and the landscape of your own life, your own history, your own place in the long story of human knowledge keeping. Those resonances are real. The 7 sites are not foreign to you. They are part of the same story that your own history is part of. The human impulse to encode knowledge in durable form, to build something that will outlast the builder, to send a message forward in time to people not yet born. That is not a specifically Australian impulse. It is a human impulse expressed with particular sophistication and particular antiquity in Australia, but recognizable everywhere that humans have left a mark. Your own ancestors, wherever they were and whenever they lived, built things that were meant to outlast them, stored knowledge in whatever form was available to them, tried to give their descendants something worth having. That is what you do when you love people who do not yet exist. You build for them. You keep knowledge alive for them. You press your hand against the wall and say, I was here, so that when they come, they will know they are not the first. The stones of Wurdi say, we were here. We understood the sky. We wanted you to understand it too. The channels of Budgebim say, we were here. We managed this country. We wanted you to have food when we were gone. The Pilbara Circle says, we were here. We gathered in this place. We ground our seeds and watched the stars and kept our community together. The Queensland Plateau Boulders say, we were here. We came from far away to make this arrangement because it was worth the distance. The Kimberley alignment says, "We were here. We watched for the season to turn. We built in stone the knowledge of when to be ready." The Flinders Ranges formation says, "We were here. We gathered at the time the stones mark. We renewed our relationships with each other and with the country." The New England Network says, "We were here. We spread our knowledge across the ridges so it would be safe, so no single loss could destroy it. 7 messages sent forward across time. You received them tonight. That is not a small thing. Now sleep. The night is yours. The dark is comfortable and complete." The stories have settled into the background where they do their best work, slowly composting into understanding, becoming part of the ground of your knowledge rather than a surface event you will remember and then forget. Some of it will stay. Something always stays. A name, a shape, a sense of scale, the knowledge that somewhere in the red heart of Australia and in its wet Kimberley north and in its cold southern highlands and on its ancient plateaus, there are stones arranged by hands that understood the sky and the seasons and the country better than most of the civilizations that came later, anywhere in the world. That knowledge is a small stone added to the arrangement of things you know. It will still be there in the morning. Good night. The breath goes in, the breath goes out. The night turns, the stars move, the ancient sites are still. Good night. Good night. Good night from the country that was old before old was a concept worth having. Good night from the knowledge that was alive before writing was invented to preserve knowledge. Good night from the stones that have been standing in the Australian dark for longer than most human languages have existed. Good night from the 7 sites, patient and cold and completely still in the hours between midnight and dawn, waiting for the morning light the way they have waited for every morning since they were built. Good night from the builders, whoever they were, however long ago they pressed those first stones into the earth and looked up at the sky and confirmed that the alignment was correct and that the knowledge would hold. Good night from the knowledge. Good night from the country. Good night. If you surfaced a little just now, that is fine. Come back down. The voice is still here. The story is still here. The night is still here. Whatever pulled you up to the surface, let it go. It will wait. The morning will deal with it. Right now, there is only the dark and the breath and the slow turning of the world. Let's go back to the beginning one more time, but differently. Not to the stones and not to the knowledge behind the stones, but to the people. To the actual human beings who built these things. Who were they? What were their lives like? What did they care about beyond the astronomical alignments and the aquaculture systems and the ceremonial networks? They were people. That is the answer that everything else grows from. They were people in the full and complete sense of that word. They had families, they had relationships that were complicated and loving and frustrating and sustaining, all at the same time, the way human relationships always are. They had preferences. There were things they liked and things they didn't. There were foods they looked forward to and tasks they found tedious. There were stories they loved to hear again and again, and stories they found less interesting. There were people in their communities who made them laugh and people who drove them to distraction. They were cold in winter and hot in summer. They got tired and sore. They had injuries that healed well and injuries that didn't. They worried about their children. They missed people who had died. They felt the pull of places they had been before and wanted to go back to. They watched the sky not just because it was useful, but because it was beautiful. Because the Milky Way on a clear night in the Australian interior is something that arrests the eye and holds it. that makes the breath come a little slower, that produces a feeling for which there is no single adequate word in English. Awe is too aggressive, wonder is too mild. It is something like the recognition of scale, the sudden understanding of how small you are and how large the dark is, and how, despite that, or perhaps because of it, you are here, breathing, looking up, part of something that contains you without diminishing you. They felt that. The people who built Wardi Yuang and the Bujbim channels and the Pilbara Circle and the Queensland Plateau arrangement and the Kimberley alignment and the Flinders Ranges formation and the New England network, they stood under the same sky you are under right now, and they felt what you feel when you look at it. If you look at it on the right kind of night, from the right kind of place, with the right kind of quiet in you, that feeling is part of what the stones are for, not just utility, not just astronomical accuracy. The experience of standing inside the arrangement and watching the sun set into position the stones mark on the exact evening that the sky and the earth have aligned to produce the solstice is an experience that goes beyond information. It is a feeling of rightness, of the world confirming itself, of the knowledge and the experience matching exactly completely, in a way that is deeply satisfying in some part of you that is older than words. The builders of the 7 sites were providing that experience for their communities. They were building a stage for the sky to perform on, a frame for the astronomical events that marked the turning of the year, a place where the community could gather and watch the sun do what the stories said it would do and feel the confirmation move through them, the settling of trust, the deepening of the sense that the world is knowable and that the knowledge they carry is true. That is a gift. Building a stone circle that produces that experience for your community, for your children, for all the children who will come after, is a gift that keeps giving for as long as the stones stand. The stones at Wardi Yuang have been standing for approximately 10,000 years, possibly more. The gift has been given continuously every solstice, every equinox, for all that time. That is the most patient generosity I can imagine, and it is still giving. Researchers studying Wardi Yuang today can stand at the alignment stones and watch the winter solstice sun set behind them and feel the same thing that the Wathaurong people of 10,000 years ago felt standing in the same position. The connection across time is real. The alignment makes it real. The sun's position on the horizon is a fact that does not change with the generations, and the stones that mark it are a bridge between every generation that has ever stood at that site on that evening and watched the light go. You are on that bridge now, not at the site itself perhaps, but in the knowledge of it, in the awareness that it exists, that it works, that it has been working for longer than any other astronomical installation currently known to science. You are connected through that knowledge to the people who built it and to every person who has stood at the alignment stones and watched the sun do what the story said it would do. The night is very late now, or very early, depending on how you count. The stars have moved a long way since the first words of this story were spoken. You have been in Australia in your mind for a long time. You have been in the Pilbara and the Victorian Plains and the Queensland interior and the Kimberley coast and the Flinders Ranges and the New England tablelands. You have been in the eel ponds of Bujbim and on the plateau above the seasonal river, and in the curved quartzite formation that opens toward the autumn sunrise in the ranges. You have been in deep time, in the kind of time that makes the word ancient feel inadequate, in the time before writing, before cities, before agriculture in any form you would recognize, in the time when the only archive was the living mind of the community, and the only library was the landscape itself, read by people who had learned to read it over tens of thousands of years. That time is not separate from the present. It is the ground the present stands on. Everything that has happened in the last 10,000 years of human history, the cities and the empires and the religions and the technologies and the wars and the discoveries and the achievements, all of it grew from the root system that the previous 290,000 years of human existence established. And the Australian branch of that root system is the longest and deepest currently surviving. The Aboriginal Australian cultures are the oldest living cultures on Earth. The sites we visited tonight are among the oldest engineered structures currently known to exist anywhere on Earth. The knowledge traditions that produce them are the oldest continuously maintained knowledge traditions in human history. That is not a small thing to know. It is, in fact, one of the most important things that can be known about the human story. That we have been here building and knowing and maintaining and passing forward for much longer than the standard history books suggest. That the capacity for complex knowledge systems and large-scale land management and astronomical observation and sophisticated social organization did not arrive with farming or with writing or with metal tools. It has been with us from the beginning, expressed in different forms in different places, but always present, always growing, always being refined and passed on. The 7 sites of Australia are 7 windows into that longer, older, deeper story. You have looked through them tonight. What you saw is real. The sites exist. The knowledge is alive. The people who are their custodians are here now, continuing the longest unbroken cultural tradition on Earth. That tradition deserves to be known. It deserves to be understood. Not as a curiosity or an exotic appendix to the standard history, but as a central part of the story of what humans are and what humans can achieve when they are in the right relationship with their knowledge, their community, and their country. The stones say, "We were here." The knowledge says, "We are still here." The night says, "Rest now," and the morning, when it comes, will confirm everything. As the sun rises in the east, it rises over the 7 sites too. It rises over the Victorian plain and warms the basalt stones of Woody Yuang slowly, the dark rock absorbing the early light. It rises over the Pilbara and turns the ancient iron formations red in a way that looks every morning like the planet itself is blushing. It rises over the Queensland Plateau and finds the boulders of the stone arrangement still pointing north, still marking the direction of the sky's significant axis. It rises over the Kimberley coast and catches the alignment stones at exactly the angle that reveals their orientation. It rises over the Flinders Ranges and shoots through the gap in the ranges that the quartzite formation is oriented toward. It rises over the New England tablelands and slowly, ridge by ridge, restores the sightlines of the network, each platform becoming visible to the others as the light returns. 7 sites receiving the same morning the builders received 10,000 years ago or more. The same morning you will receive wherever you are when the night has done its work and released you back into the day. That continuity is extraordinary, that you and those builders share a morning, separated by millennia but connected by the sun that rises in the same way for all of you, marking the same passage of the earth through its daily rotation, confirming the same astronomical knowledge. The sun is the most patient teacher there is. It has been teaching the same lesson every morning since the earth was young enough to have mornings. The lesson is this: the world is reliable, the patterns hold. The knowledge you built your life on is true. The morning confirms it. Every morning confirms it. And this morning, wherever it comes for you, will too. Sleep until then. The story is complete. Not finished, because this story never finishes. The stone circle on the Victorian plain will still be there when every living person who heard this tonight has gone. And it will still be there when their grandchildren are gone, and their grandchildren's grandchildren, and so on across the unimaginable distances of future time. But complete in the sense that what needed to be said has been said, that the 7 sites have been visited, that the knowledge has been shared, that the gift has been passed along one more time. Good night. Good night from Woody Yuang. Good night from the Pilbara Plateau. Good night from the sandstone escarpment above the Central Coast Valley. Good night from Budj Bim and its patient eel channels. Good night from the Queensland boulders pointing north. Good night from the Kimberley alignment on its coastal rise. Good night from the New England network of high places. Good night from the oldest civilization on Earth. Good night from the country that holds its secrets in stone and sky, and the living knowledge of the people who have always been its custodians. Good night. The breath goes slow, the body settles, the night does its quiet ancient work. Good night. The deep hours of the night have their own geography. There are levels to the dark, depths to the quiet, layers of stillness that open one beneath the other like the geological strata of the ancient Australian landscape we have been travelling through together. You have gone down several of those levels already. Your body has found its resting configuration. Your breathing has found its nighttime pace. The conscious mind has loosened its grip on the day's concerns, and the older, deeper part of your mind has taken over the gentle work of being alive through the dark. In that state, the things you have heard tonight are doing something different than they do when you are fully awake. They are settling, organizing themselves into a kind of sediment at the bottom of your awareness, becoming part of the layer of things you simply know without having to actively remember knowing them. The name Woody Yuang will mean something to you now in a way it didn't when we began. The Budj Bim wetlands have a reality in your mind that they didn't have before. The Pilbara, which may have been for you previously just a vague sense of red Australian landscape, now has a circle of ancient stones in it, a specific place where people gathered and ground seeds and watched the sky. These things are yours now, carried forward. That is how knowledge moves through time when it moves through human minds rather than through books or databases. It settles, it becomes part of the substrate. It shapes the way new information is understood, the way future experiences are interpreted, the way the world makes sense. You will not remember every word of what was said tonight, but you will remember enough to know that the oldest structures in Australia predate the pyramids by many thousands of years. Enough to know that the people who built them were sophisticated astronomers and engineers. Enough to know that their descendants are still here, still connected to the knowledge, still maintaining the longest continuous cultural tradition on Earth. That is a significant thing to carry. It is light and it is permanent, the way all genuine knowledge is light and permanent, taking up no space but changing everything it touches. The night is past its midpoint now. The long slope back toward morning has begun, though it will be hours yet before any evidence of the returning light is visible in the sky. For now, it is simply dark, simply quiet, simply the middle of the night anywhere in the world, and you are in it. Let's let the seven sights speak one more time, each in its own way, before the story finally releases you into sleep. Wudi Yuang speaks in the language of patience. It has been here for a very long time. It will be here for a very long time. The basalt stones are dark and heavy and completely indifferent to the passage of human time in the way that only very old things can be indifferent. But their arrangement is not indifferent. Their arrangement is deliberate, intentional, still oriented exactly as it was oriented when the last stone was placed. The patience of the arrangement is the patience of accumulated knowledge, which does not age in the way that everything else ages. It remains what it is. The Pilbara circle speaks in the language of the ancient present. In the Pilbara, the rock itself is so old that the concept of age loses its meaning in the presence of it. 3 billion years of iron-rich banding, 3 billion sunrises soaked into the stone. The circle of darker stones on the ancient plateau is young by comparison, an afterthought. A human moment in a geological conversation that was already impossibly long when the first human foot touched Australian soil. And yet the circle is not diminished by the age of the rock beneath it. If anything, it is given a context that deepens its meaning. Humans came here to this ancient place and added their own layer of intention to the geological record. The rock remembers everything. The circle is the most recent memory, and it will be remembered for a very long time. The sandstone plateau above the Central Coast Valley speaks in the language of questions. It is the most ambiguous of the seven sites, the one where the evidence is most contested, where the debate between geological formation and intentional construction is still unresolved. But the question itself is significant. The fact that the site raises the question that it is ambiguous enough to be taken seriously as a possible construction, while being ambiguous enough to allow for natural explanations, tells us something about the limits of current knowledge. Not about the site, about us, about what we know how to see and what we have not yet learned to recognize. The sandstone plateau is a humility lesson. It says, you do not yet know everything. You are still learning to read. Be patient. Keep looking. Buj Bim speaks as a language of generosity. 6,000 years of eel ponds, of managed channels, of stone walls built to feed people who would not be born for centuries. The Gunditjmara people who built the system were not thinking about monuments. They were thinking about food, about the people who would need food after them, about how to manage the land and water they had been given so that it would produce abundantly not just in their lifetime, but in the lifetimes of people they would never know. That is the deepest form of generosity, the kind that expects nothing in return because the recipients have not yet been born. The stone channels of Budj Bim are generosity encoded in volcanic rock. They will still be generosity encoded in volcanic rock in another 6,000 years. The Queensland Plateau boulders speak in the language of effort. Someone moved those stones from a source that was not immediately local. They planned, they organized, they built something in a location that required effort to reach, using materials that required effort to transport, to create an arrangement that would serve a purpose that justified all that effort. The specific nature of that purpose is still being understood, but the effort itself is legible in the archaeology. The boulders were not here by accident. They were carried here because they needed to be here, because the knowledge that the arrangement encodes required the right stones in the right place, and the people who built it were willing to do the work of making that happen. effort is a form of reverence. The effort encoded in the Queensland boulders says that the knowledge they encode was worth enormous respect. The Kimberley alignment speaks in the language of anticipation. Its whole purpose is to mark a moment that has not yet arrived. The star group that rises in alignment with it is the herald of something coming, the wet season that transforms the landscape, the rain that fills the rivers and greens the plains. The alignment is a way of watching for what is coming, of being ready, of knowing that the signal has arrived before the thing it signals arrives. There is something deeply hopeful about that function. The Kimberley alignment was built by people who expected the future to come, who built a permanent marker to help them recognize its arrival, who trusted that the sky would send the signal at the right time, as it always had. The alignment is optimism in stone. The Flinders Ranges formation speaks in the language of gathering. Its curved shape, opening toward the east, is a form that invites approach from that direction. The people who came to the site at the time the stones mark were coming from the east, from their territories in the ranges and the plains beyond. The formation receives them. It says, yes, this is the place, this is the time. You have read the season correctly and arrived when you should. Come in. Sit in the curve of the stones and renew your relationships with each other and with the country. The formation is hospitality. It is welcome. It is the physical expression of a community's desire to gather and be together, encoded in stone so that the welcome is permanent, available to every generation that needs to be told, yes, this is the right place, the stones confirm it. The New England network speaks in the language of connection. Each of its elements is incomplete without the others. No single platform contains the whole calendar, the whole year's worth of astronomical knowledge. Together they do. Together they create something that no individual site could create. A system for understanding time that is spread across the landscape in a form that requires the participation of an entire community, of many groups moving between the platforms over the course of the year, confirming the seasonal markers, maintaining the sightlines, keeping the conversation between the high places alive. The network says you cannot know everything alone. The knowledge belongs to all of us together. Come and contribute your piece, and we will contribute ours, and together we will have the whole. 7 sites, 7 languages, 1 story. The story is older than any written language. It is older than any city. It is older than any empire or civilization or cultural tradition currently surviving in the historical record, with the single exception of the one that built the sites themselves. And it is alive. That is what I want to leave you with as the story releases you into sleep. Not just the age of the sites, which is remarkable, and not just the sophistication of the knowledge they encode, which is extraordinary, but the aliveness of the tradition that produced them. The Wathaurong people are still connected to Wurdi The Gunditj Mara are still connected to Budj Bim, and it is World Heritage listed, and the eel ponds are being rehabilitated. The Aboriginal communities of the Pilbara are still connected to the sites of their country. The Darkinjung people are still connected to the sandstone country of the Central Coast. The traditional custodians of the Queensland Plateau are still connected to the boulders that their ancestors moved to mark the sky. The Ngarinyin people are still connected to the Kimberley coast and the alignment that points toward the season-changing stars. The Anaiwan people are still connected to the network of high places in the New England tablelands. These connections were not severed by colonization, though enormous effort was made to sever them. They survived because the knowledge was held in people, not only in stone or text, and people can carry knowledge through circumstances that would destroy any physical archive. The people moved and were scattered and were forced from their countries and were forbidden to perform their ceremonies and were punished for speaking their languages. But the knowledge went with them, and when the political conditions changed, when the legal right to return to country was partially restored, when the space opened for the ceremonies to be performed again in the places where they belonged, the knowledge was still there, still accurate, still alive. That survival is the most extraordinary achievement in the story of the seven sites. Not the initial construction, though that was extraordinary. The continuation, the maintenance, the refusal to let the knowledge die even when everything was arranged to make it die. The stones helped. They were there when the people came back. They confirmed that the places were what the knowledge said they were. The alignment was still accurate. The eel channels still functioned. The boulders were still pointing north. The sight lines between the network platforms were still open. The knowledge had survived, and the stones confirmed that it was correct. The world still worked the way the stories said it worked. That confirmation matters. It matters in the same way that the winter solstice sunset matters to the person standing at the Wurdi Yuang alignment stones and watching the sun go down exactly where the stories said it would. The world confirms itself. The knowledge is true. The connection is real. You are connected now too, through this story, through the knowledge you have carried away from it, through the awareness that these places exist, that these traditions are alive, that the oldest civilization on Earth is still here, still practicing, still building the knowledge systems, and maintaining the relationships with country that have sustained it for longer than any other civilization in human history. That awareness is a form of connection. Small, distant, mediated by words and technology in a way that the direct connection of the traditional custodians is not, but real, not nothing. Part of the larger conversation that is happening, slowly and incompletely, but genuinely, between the dominant culture and the oldest culture, about what the oldest culture knows and what the dominant culture has been missing. The missing things are many. The conversation has barely started. But it is happening, and every person who knows more about the seven sites tonight than they did when the sun set wherever they are in the world is a small increment in the direction of that conversation going somewhere important. Sleep now and wake up knowing something true. The world is older than you thought. The people who have been on this earth the longest know things that are worth knowing. The knowledge is alive. The country holds it. The stones confirm it. Good night from the deep heart of the oldest story on earth. Good night from the country that was tended before any other country was imagined. Good night from the knowledge that has been kept alive through everything by the people whose knowledge it is. Good night from the seven sites. Good night. The breath comes in and goes out. The night turns on its ancient axis. The stars move in their reliable arcs. The world is what it is. You are part of it. Rest. Good night. Good night. Good night. Just the dark now. Just the breath. Just the slow, quiet work of the body. Doing what it has always done, what it was shaped to do across millions of years of evolution, through the long, cold nights of the Ice Age and the hot nights of the interglacial periods, and the cold again, and the warm again, and all the variation in between. The body knows how to be at night. It is very good at it. Let it do its work. The mind can rest too. The mind has done a lot tonight. It has traveled a long way through very old country. It has held a lot of time in itself, more time than it usually holds. The kind of time that makes ordinary time feel briefly thin and insufficient by comparison. It can rest now in that expanded sense of time. It can let the understanding of deep history and long continuity be a quiet background, rather than an active foreground. The sites are there, they will still be there. The knowledge is alive, it will still be alive. The people are here, they will still be here. You can rest from knowing. The knowing does not require your active attention to remain true. The truth holds itself. It always has. It doesn't need you to stay awake to maintain it. The sun will rise in the morning. The stones at Wardi Yuang will confirm the season. The eel channels of Buj Bim will carry their water. The boulders on the Queensland Plateau will point their patient north. The Kimberley alignment will wait for the star group that comes before the rain. The Flinders Ranges formation will catch its seasonal sunrise. The New England network will restore its sight lines in the morning light. The Pilbara Circle will be ancient on its ancient plateau. Everything will be as it should be. And you will wake up having carried something forward, something small and light and real, one more person in the world who knows that the 7 sites exist and that they are extraordinary and that the knowledge behind them is alive. That is enough. That is more than enough. Good night. Let the dark have you now. Let sleep complete its ancient work. Good night from Australia. Good night. There is a tradition in some Aboriginal Australian communities of telling certain stories only at night. Not because the stories are secret, though some are held carefully and shared only in the right context with the right people, but because the night is the appropriate time for them. The night brings the stars into view, and many of the stories are about the stars or involve the stars, or can only be fully understood when the sky they reference is visible overhead. To tell those stories in daylight would be to tell them without their most important context. Other stories are told only at night because the night brings a particular quality of attention. In the dark, without the visual stimulation of the world around you, the mind turns inward. It listens more carefully. It holds the images the story creates more vividly. It is more receptive to the kind of information that travels in metaphor and image and the particular grammar of a well-told story, which is different from the grammar of daylight, practical communication. This story has been told at night, whatever night it is for you. The dark has done its work on your attention. The images have been held vividly. The information has traveled in the way it travels best, through a combination of factual content and the atmosphere in which it is received, the quiet, the darkness, the particular state of mind that comes in the late hours when the day's urgency has finally released its grip. The 7 sites are now part of your night geography, not just facts stored in the filing system of memory, but places with a kind of presence in you, a weight and a reality that the merely factual doesn't produce. You have been there, in whatever sense that word applies to a journey taken in the imagination while lying still in the dark. That kind of knowing has its own validity. The Aboriginal Australian tradition that tells stories to transmit knowledge does not assume that the listener needs to physically visit every place mentioned in the story to understand it. The story carries the place to the listener. The right story, told in the right way at the right time, creates in the listener's mind something that functions like experience. Not identical to direct experience, but not nothing either. Something. You have something now that you didn't have when we began. In the morning, if you want to pursue it further, the paths are available. The research on Wadi Yuang by Dwayne Hamacher and his colleagues is published and accessible. The UNESCO listing of the Budj Bim cultural landscape comes with documentation that is worth reading. The Kimberley Rock Art research is the subject of several excellent books and many peer-reviewed papers. The Pilbara Heritage Surveys are lodged with the Western Australian Government. The Aboriginal astronomical traditions of Australia are discussed in Hamaker's book, and in the work of many other researchers who have collaborated with Aboriginal communities to document and understand the knowledge systems that produce sites like the 7 we visited tonight. The living knowledge traditions are held by the communities themselves, and the way to access those is to engage with the people and organizations that are the custodians of that knowledge, respectfully and on their terms, understanding that some things are appropriately shared with the wider world, and some things are appropriately held within the community that owns them. That distinction between knowledge that is meant to be shared and knowledge that is meant to be held is itself an important piece of the larger understanding. Not everything is public. Not everything is for everyone. The respectful acknowledgement of that boundary is part of understanding the traditions, not an obstacle to it. But enough has been shared tonight to give you a genuine picture of what these 7 sites are and what they represent. Enough to understand that Australia's deep history is not the empty prehistory that the colonial narrative constructed. Enough to know that the oldest civilization on Earth built things that are older than the pyramids, and that the knowledge behind those things is alive today. That is enough. That is a significant enough piece of the story to carry with you and to share in whatever contexts feel appropriate to you. Now, let's let the story do one final thing. Let it simply be present with you in the last stretch of night, without urgency, without direction, just accompanying you toward the sleep that is very close now. The Australian night is long at this time of year, whichever hemisphere you're in. The dark has weight and depth. The stars, if you could see them through the roof or the ceiling or the clouds or the city light, are moving in their slow, reliable arcs, tracing the same paths they have traced every night since the Earth settled into its current orbit. Paths that the builders of Wadi Yuang knew and encoded in stone, that the traditional custodians of the New England network knew and spread across their ridges, that the Ngarinyan people knew and built into their coastal alignment. The sky is the same sky. The earth is the same earth. The night is the same night that all your ancestors moved through. From the ones who built the first stone circle, to the ones who first crossed the land bridge to the Americas, to the ones who built the pyramids, to the ones who built the cathedrals, to the ones who built the skyscraper outside your window, if there is one. All of it connected, all of it part of the same long story of humans building in the most durable materials available, encoding their knowledge in forms that will outlast them, trying to send something true forward into the future. You are in that story, not just as a recipient of what was built and known before you, but as someone who is, in this moment, doing what all your ancestors did in the deepest part of the night, being alive in the dark, breathing, letting the knowledge you have accumulated settle into the substrate, preparing for the morning. The morning comes. It always comes, but not yet. For now, just the dark and the breath and the knowledge settling and the long, slow, patient turning of the earth. Wadi Yuang is dark and cold on the Victorian plain. The basalt stones are beaded with dew. The grass around them is pale and still. The yu-yangs are dark shapes against a sky that is beginning, very slowly and very faintly in the hour before the false dawn, to take on a quality of depth rather than flatness. The dark is still dark, but it is a deeper dark than it was, a dark that has direction in it, a dark that knows where the light is coming from. In the Pilbara, the night temperature is at its lowest. The desert cold is complete and merciless, the kind of cold that makes the stars look sharper, that strips the air of anything that might soften the light. The ancient circle is frost-free because the high thermal mass of the dark rock radiates its stored warmth slowly through the night, but the stones are cool to the touch, and the air around them carries the particular smell of cold desert before dawn, mineral and clean. At Budge Bim, the water in the channels moves silently in the dark. The eel ponds are still. A waterbird somewhere in the reed beds makes a single sound and then is quiet again. The volcanic plain around the wetlands is dark and flat and enormous, stretching to a horizon that the false dawn will soon begin to define. On the Queensland Plateau, the night has a different quality. The height brings the stars closer, or rather brings the observer closer to the stars, removes a fraction of the atmospheric density that keeps the sky at a comfortable distance during daylight. The boulders of the arrangement are part of the darkness, absorbed into it, visible only as slightly denser shapes against the paler sky. The Kimberley tidal flats are catching the first hint of the coming day in the reflection of the sky on the wet mud. The mud at this hour has a faint luminosity, a quality of being slightly lighter than it should be given the available light, as though it is remembering the day it will have in a few hours and beginning to practice for it. The Flinders Ranges are still deep in the dark, the mountains holding the night later than the surrounding plains, because their mass delays the arrival of the light. The quartzite formation is invisible in this darkness, but it is there, patient and pale and oriented toward the gap where the light will come. The New England tablelands have the coldest pre-dawn of all the 7 sites, the high altitude bringing the frost hard and early. The platforms on the ridges are silvered with ice crystals. The sight lines between them are still open, the ridges visible against a sky that has not yet begun to show the colors of the coming day, but that has passed its deepest dark and is beginning its long, slow brightening. 7 sites in the pre-dawn dark, 7 places holding the edge of the night. You are with them in your way. In your own dark place, in your own pre-dawn quiet, in your own long settling toward the sleep that has been approaching for the entire length of this story. Let it come. The 7 sights will still be there when you wake. The knowledge will still be true. The connections will still be real. The oldest civilization on Earth will still be here, maintaining its relationships with its country, keeping its knowledge alive, telling its stories. The story will still be here when you want to return to it. For now, let it rest. Let the dark be complete. Let the breath be slow and even. Let the mind go wherever it goes in the deepest part of sleep, the place that has no language and needs none. The place where the body does its most important work. The place where everything that was learned today becomes part of everything that was learned before. Integrated, settled, made part of the ground. The 7 sites are part of your ground now. The oldest knowledge is part of your ground now. Good night. The dark is complete. The breath is slow. The world is old and patient and full of knowledge kept alive across times too long for ordinary imagination. You are part of it. Rest in that. Good night, good night, good night. The basalt is cold. The channel carries water. The alignment points east. The boulders remember north. The circle holds its space on the ancient plateau. The quartzite waits for its sunrise. The platforms watch each other across the dark valleys. 7 sites, 1 story, very old. Still alive. Good night from Australia. Good night, good night, good night. Sleep now, sleep deeply. Sleep the way your ancestors slept under the same stars, in the care of the country that has held humans for longer than anywhere else on Earth. Sleep the way you sleep when you know you are part of something real and old and continuous. Sleep. Good night. There is something that happens in the last few minutes before deep sleep finally arrives that is unlike any other state of consciousness. The boundary between the thinking mind and the dreaming mind becomes permeable. Images arrive without being summoned. Connections form between things that the waking mind would not have connected. The logic of the night takes over from the logic of the day. And the night's logic is older, looser, more associative, more willing to let one thing become another thing without needing to explain the transformation. The 7 sites of Australia are good material for that kind of thinking. They are large and old enough to be comfortable in the night's logic. A stone circle in Victoria can become, without effort, a galaxy viewed from above. A volcanic channel in the Budgebim wetlands can become a river in the dreaming landscape, running somewhere that is not on any map. The boulders on the Queensland Plateau can become any boulders, any place, any arrangement of patient stones in any landscape that your sleeping mind wants to place them. That is how the oldest stories work too. They are not fixed in the specifics of their geography. They carry the geography within them as a kind of DNA, but they can unfold in any landscape, in any night, in any mind that is open to them. The story of Wurdi Yawang is also the story of every place where humans stood and watched the sky and tried to understand what they were seeing. The story of Buj Bim is also the story of every act of careful management, every investment in the long future, every decision to build something for people not yet born. The story of the Kimberley alignment is also the story of every time humans watched for a signal that something important was coming and built a way of not missing it. Those are universal stories. They belong to everyone, though they were lived out with particular intensity and particular sophistication in Australia by the people who have been here the longest. The universality does not diminish the specificity, it enriches it. When you understand that the specific story of Wurdi Yawang is also a universal story about the human relationship with the sky, both things become more meaningful. The specific because it is grounded in the universal. The universal because it is grounded in the specific. The 7 sites are specific. 10,000 years of Wathaurong astronomical tradition expressed in basalt on a cold Victorian plain. 6,000 years of Gunditjmara aquaculture expressed in volcanic stone channels in a Western Victoria wetland. The accumulated knowledge of the Pilbara's Aboriginal communities expressed in a circle of dark stones on an ancient plateau. The ceremonial geography of the Queensland traditional custodians expressed in moved boulders on a high tableland. The Ngarinyan astronomical tradition expressed in a coastal alignment into Kimberley. The Adnyamathana seasonal knowledge expressed in a curved quartzite formation in the Flinders Ranges. The inter-community communication network of the Anaiwan and their neighbours expressed in a series of high-place platforms across the New England tablelands. 7 specific places with specific peoples, with specific knowledge systems, with specific histories of use and meaning and continuity across time, and also all of them together, a universal story about what humans do when they are in the right relationship with the world. They pay attention, they accumulate knowledge, they encode it in forms that will outlast them. They pass it forward, they maintain the connection between the knowledge and the places where the knowledge lives. They teach the next generation not just the facts, but the feeling of the facts, the confirmation that comes when you stand at the alignment stones and watch the sunset where the story said it would set. That is what all great teaching does. It does not just transfer information, it creates the conditions under which the learner can confirm for themselves that the information is true. The stone circles and the eel channels and the plateau boulders and the coastal alignments are not just knowledge storage. They are knowledge confirmation systems. They are places where the learner can check their understanding against the world and find that the understanding is correct. And the world never fails to confirm it. The sun rises and sets in the positions the stones mark year after year forever. The eels run in the channels the Gunditjmara built, returning each season as they have always returned. The star group rises in the position the Kimberley alignment points toward, heralding the wet season as it has always heralded it. The mid-autumn sunrise comes through the gap in the Flinders Ranges at the angle the quartzite formation is oriented toward, as it has always come. The world is reliable. The knowledge that accurately describes it is confirmed by it, endlessly, without exception. That reliability is one of the most profound gifts that the natural world offers to creatures capable of noticing it. The gift of a world that follows rules, that behaves consistently, that can be known, that rewards the effort of knowing it. The Aboriginal Australian knowledge systems took that gift and made the most of it. Over 65,000 years of careful observation and knowledge transmission and site construction and ceremony and story. They built the most comprehensive and durable relationship between human knowledge and natural reality that any culture has ever achieved. And the 7 sites we visited tonight are 7 places where that relationship is written in stone. Good night from those places. Good night from the knowledge that built them. Good night from the people who maintain them. Good night from the country that holds them. Good night. The night is almost over now, though you might not know it yet. The deepest dark has passed somewhere in the last hour without announcement. The world is still completely dark where you are, but the quality of the dark has changed, has become the dark that is on its way to becoming something else. The dark that contains within it the seed of the coming morning, even though no evidence of that morning has yet appeared. The 7 sites are in that dark too. The volcanic plain of Wurdi Yuang, the ancient Pilbara Plateau, the Budj Bim wetlands, the Queensland tableland, the Kimberley coast, the Flinders Ranges, the New England tablelands, all of them in the dark that has passed its deepest degree and begun its long, slow journey back toward light. They will still be there when the light comes. They will always be there when the light comes. The knowledge will still be alive. The people will still be here. The country will still be country. And you will wake up having been part of the oldest story on earth for one night in your own way in the dark. That is enough. Sleep. Good night, good night, good night. Something worth saying before the dark takes you completely, before the last thread of wakefulness releases and sleep does its final work. The story you heard tonight is not finished. It cannot be finished. The research into Australia's deep history is ongoing. Every season, in the red dirt of the Pilbara and on the sandstone plateaus of Queensland, and in the volcanic country of Western Victoria, and along the ancient coastlines of the Kimberley, and in the cold highlands of the New England tablelands. Researchers are finding new sites, making new connections, adding new understanding to a picture that is still emerging. The picture has been taking shape for 65,000 years, and the people who hold the most complete version of it are the traditional custodians who have been building and maintaining it for that entire time. The scientific tradition adds its tools: carbon dating, satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotope studies that can tell you where a person spent their childhood based on the chemical signatures in their teeth. These tools are genuinely useful. They are revealing things about Australia's prehistory that would not be knowable without them. The age of the Budge Bim system, confirmed by radiocarbon dating of charcoal in the eel trap construction. The antiquity of the Murujuga rock art, assessed through uranium-thorium dating of the carbonate crusts that formed over the engravings. The genetic evidence of human arrival in Australia before 60,000 years ago, confirmed by the analysis of ancient DNA from museum collections. But the scientific tools are incomplete without the human knowledge that gives them context. A date is a number. A number needs a story to become meaningful. The date of the Budge Bim eel channels becomes meaningful only when you understand the Gunditjmara relationship with country that motivated their construction and has maintained them for 6,000 years. The age of the Murujuga rock art becomes meaningful only when you understand the knowledge traditions of the Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation and the significance of those images in the ongoing life of the communities whose ancestors made them. The conversation between scientific research and living cultural knowledge is the most important conversation in Australian archaeology right now. And it is happening imperfectly, with friction, with misunderstanding on both sides, but genuinely and with increasing mutual respect. The outcome of that conversation will be a better understanding of Australia's deep history than either tradition could produce alone. That understanding will take time. It will take many years of careful work, of relationship building, of learning to speak across different epistemological traditions, of trust established slowly and maintained patiently, but it is being built. The 7 sites we visited tonight are part of that building. Each one is a place where the conversation is happening, where researchers and traditional custodians are working together to understand what the site is and what it means and how old it is and what the knowledge behind it says about the human capacity for building and maintaining relationship with country across enormous spans of time. That is work worth doing. It is work being done. And you, who now know that these sites exist and that this conversation is happening, are part of its audience, part of the wider world to which the outcomes of that conversation eventually need to be communicated. Part of the reason the researchers keep working and the traditional custodians keep sharing what it is appropriate to share and the conversation continues. Good night from the conversation. Good night from the research. Good night from the collaboration between ancient knowledge and new tools. Good night from the 7 sites, patient and old and fully present in the ongoing life of the communities that know them best. Good night. Sleep well. The morning is very close now. in the east, below the horizon, gathering itself for the daily miracle of arrival. But it is not here yet, for now there is still the dark and the breath and the slow warm weight of your body at rest, and the knowledge of Australia's deep history settling into the ground of your mind. Good night from the oldest country. Good night, good night.